o'clock.
5, is this enough?
We give another. Well, when Sherry's ready and Kurt's ready, we'll just go ahead and start.
Okay. I don't see any emails, but I'll go ahead and just. I'm ready when you're ready, Kurt.
Okay. All right, welcome to the Board and Commission Structure Committee meeting. Do you need to do any sort of, if there are people online, do you need to do a
Yeah.
little spiel?
I'll read just a quick statement on this one. If you are attending this meeting via Zoom, please ensure you are muted and your video is off and you are not actively participating in the meeting. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. When you are participating, please unmute and turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat and those go directly to me. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Thank you.
Thank you. And would you like to take roll right now?
Yes. Sharon Ashworth.
Present.
Katie Barnett. Sharon Ellenbecker. Travis Harrod.
Here.
Christopher Cohart.
Here.
John Nalbandian. Stanley Rasmussen. And Daniel Smith.
Here.
All right, thank you. All right, well, thank you all. We are here based on what, all the work you did the last time. We met and you gave directions for the average terms and vacancies data and moved us right on to talking about operating rules and procedures. That's where I did watch the last meeting. So we should probably first do the minutes. For now, I will have to, of course, abstain, although I did watch the meeting. So,
This is John now.
Yes.
I do have a question. I'm not sure it's the minutes or where, but on the boards that are listed in the various documents here, there's nothing with the health board.
well, let's get to that
Oh, okay.
after we do the minutes, and we can bring that up when we dive into it.
And
So,
also, we have someone in the waiting room on Zoom.
Oh, thank you. Oh. Kurt?
Yeah, sorry, I'm on your computer accidentally.
Okay.
Just a little hacking going on.
That would be great.
Awesome.
Ah. Are you able to, Kurt?
Yeah,
I'm struggling.
it's JT Thornburg, and just let him in.
Thank you.
okay,
Got it.
thank you. So are there any amendments to the minutes from those that attended the meeting last time?
Is she, oh, looks like the door's locked. I'm not sure. I'll go grab it.
Oh, wait.
We'll wait. Hello. We're just looking at the minutes, Sharon. So were there any changes, amendments to the minutes? As I said, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Make a motion to approve the February 9th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Any seconds?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Sherry, could you call the vote for the approval of minutes?
Absolutely. Sharon Ashworth,
Abstain?
Sharon Ellenbecker,
Approve.
Travis Harrod,
Approve.
Christopher Kohar,
Approve.
John Nalbandian,
I was abstained too because I wasn't here.
Daniel Smith.
Approve.
Great, thank you all. Now we can get started on the meat of the discussion. You had a very fruitful discussion the last time. I did watch it, and that is why we've ended up with this agenda here. The first part of the agenda for the average terms and vacancies, we'll let Sherry tell us any of her additional thoughts on this data. But I do want to make sure we manage our time to discuss the meat of it here, the operating rules and procedures. So I want to make sure that our discussion of the average terms and vacancies, make sure it is very relevant to a future for our discussion of our task of reviewing the boards and commissions, and not get too down into the weeds with which commissions are doing what. So just like make it relevant for our work going forward.
So I have a general question about this thing. When we look at the average number of days of vacancies, does that suggest that there is a scarcity of people who want to be on boards, or are we okay with that? Because if there is a scarcity, then I noticed that we have in the rules, you can only be on one board at a time. And if there's a scarcity of people, then one board at a time is probably, I don't know.
So I'll just kind of outline how we pulled the data. So at the last meeting, there was a request for information on terms, vacancies, quorum. I'll go ahead and start off and say finding how often meetings were canceled for lack of a quorum proved to be very difficult just based on the software that we have. If we try to know in advance so we don't have staff show up and all of you show up, and so that meeting, if it was scheduled, gets canceled, but it doesn't necessarily say why. So that was information that was not going to be easy for us to determine when. I do think that's something we will want to address in realignment, because that's going to be how we track if members are in attendance. So that's something we're looking at. But in terms of the data that we have, so we looked at the terms. We looked at the term for each individual that served on a board in a particular position, and we pulled that data by board. We then filtered that data find the average length of service for that board. So I sent that all to you. It was attached to the agenda. I did go ahead, because staff had some time this afternoon, and just kind of put that in more of a chart form, in a graph, just so you could get an idea of what that looks like. And that's just to give you an idea, how long are people staying on this board? Are they serving, one term and that's it? Are they not even completing their term? We don't really know why they did or didn't complete the term. And then on the vacancies, we looked at it by position. So if there's 9 by board and by position. So if there's 9 positions, they're generally labeled by that, position 1, position 2, position 3. And we then looked at gaps, and we did those by days, and then again we averaged that for the board. Just some general patterns I saw is, you could have one term that was hard to fill, or that had a long extended vacancy, and that kind of throws off the whole average for that board. Also, if you have a 9-member board versus 5, which is why I put the data starts in the chart that I sent you all, just to give you some idea of how much data we have for the board. Generally, I would say we didn't really see a strong pattern in terms of whether it was hard to fill or a specialized position, because both were the same. For instance, the Historic Resources Commission has a position for an attorney, and it was vacant for almost a year and a half. And so, but it wasn't always specialized positions. A lot of them were just members at large positions that had vacancies as well. We did struggle a little bit to sort of put it in a format for you to see any relevant, I wouldn't say relevant data, but there weren't a lot of strong patterns, I would say, in the information that we pulled. But we can certainly play around with it more if you want. And again, we have all of the data by board, by member, by individual, if you want to see that. But we were trying to present it to you in a way that would show give you kind of what you were looking for. Are certain boards struggling with vacancies, and are certain boards struggling with lengths of service? And I'm not sure there's a strong pattern there, but I'll let you all determine that.
Can you tell, what the most terms currently, are they 3-year terms on most?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. And so some of those you'll notice we have from 2014. If you think when we implemented this system in 2019, you may have somebody who had finished an end of term and then did 2 terms. So if they were a current member, we entered their term into this system. So that's why some of the data goes back further. I will point out we do not have information on vacancies for Planning Commission. That is not in their terms of service, and the management of those boards is that data. That's all handled by planning and is not in the system. And so I've reached out to them to try to get that information. We just weren't able to get it done prior to. I think it's the way that board was set up initially, was set up a little bit different than the others in the system. And so it's in there, it just isn't in a format I was able to pull. But I was able to get their length of service.
I would say to Dr. Albandian's point of whether this speaks to, accessibility of individual language, this does speak to if we do have a difficulty that justifies or supports one of the reasons of why we're consolidating these down. Like if you look at this probably in 10 committees versus 20, 25 committees, that same pool of people we may not see it. And I don't know, that might be a causation correlation argument, but if we have fewer with the same pool, I don't think we have as much potential turnover. I would ask, I don't want to get too in the weeds because I think this is just to help inform where we're going. Is there any data that we see from other cities that have commissions of what average terms, length of service, or vacancy days in commissions are?
We haven't pulled any of that.
And is that even an available data that is accessible?
It wasn't super easy for Cherry to do, I don't think, and so asking a colleague in another city to pull that probably would not be. I don't think anybody really goes through and publishes this data or does this kind of analysis. This kind of a undertaking isn't done very often either.
Because that's what, anytime we have analytics, comparing them to ourselves is great, but comparing it to outside is helpful. I don't know that I would want to go through that process for what we're currently doing. I think this informs what we need to do moving forward. At least that's just my opinion on it. But if we had it, I would be interested to know what that would look like.
Well, we would start from a position where we're already kind of an outlier, right?
Right.
So we have 40-some, and our peer cities have 16.
Right.
So already you've got sort of this lopsided spot to start your analysis, so
Right.
you might just have to be content with what's in front of us.
I'd agree.
The only thing I was trying to look for when I was looking through this just real quickly this afternoon is if I could pick out any, and maybe Sherry can speak to this, were there certain, I noticed the average days of positions or vacancies is really short on the Public Incentives Review Committee. So that just made me think, are there certain committees that seem to be where it's easy to recruit and are popular, so to speak, to serve on, more likely for people to serve on? And I look through the others, if it's a committee that's going to tell the city how to spend its money, is that more likely to get people on it, or any sort of trend like that? And I couldn't pick anything out of this, so I don't know if you noticed it.
I couldn't either, and part of, what our system is, I can't attach these spreadsheets as a spreadsheet, it's just a PDF, which is why I sent it to you in that format to where you could filter by, terms of service or vacancy, because that really changes. If you're looking at length of service, some boards have really great length of service, but high turnover, but high vacancy rate. So,
Okay.
I was not able to do that, but I certainly, I think you could filter and change, move the information around and maybe get a better sense of that, but we weren't able to come up.
Okay, I just want to know if you'd seen anything that stood out like that. Okay. Does anybody have anything more to say about the data?
Sure. Daniel B. Smith. Yeah, not getting too into the weeds, there are a couple standouts. I mean, both you and I are on Special Alcohol Funding Advisory Board, and so like we are aware of the particulars of that situation. There's a couple things like that that do stand out, but overall, I'm more surprised by how small some of the bodies are. I don't think I realized that there were some that were all the way down to 5, which is pretty small. I think overall, I'm surprised that the vacancy, the number of days positions are vacant isn't longer for some of these. I feel like overall the averages are actually pretty good. And then also just looking at this data just makes me really cognizant of the fact that, and I did a little calculation on my phone, but there's 150 people represented here, and that's who we're talking about across all the boards and commissions for the city of Lawrence. 150 people is simultaneously a pretty small amount of people considering the size of Lawrence, and then also Kingsburg. And then also 150 people is also quite a lot of people from like a volunteer coordination standpoint. So talking about the fact that like not that many cities have undergone this sort of process, I also feel like not that many cities probably sort of look for opportunities to increase recruitment and increase awareness of these sorts of things. I assume the way that our city operates is how most cities operate, where you have these positions and you generally wait for people to come and apply for them. Maybe people on the boards are telling their friends or trying to spread the word, and maybe people on the city commission might help identify folks, but I really do feel like we have an opportunity to sort of change things and be a little more innovative in getting the word out and making more than 150 people in the community aware that this opportunity exists, because it is just such a tiny little group of people we're ultimately talking about. And I know we're trying to condense things to some extent, but the fact that it's already such a small pool is kind of wild to think about.
Other observations from the data? Except that I'm sure we will turn back to it as we go through our discussions, definitely, in terms of size of boards and turnovers. I mean, this gives us something to look back on as we get into the nitty-gritty of the boards and commissions. So thank you, Sherry, for putting that together.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is item number 2. In watching the last session, maybe Travis can help out here. The purpose statements, I'm a little vague on what was it, except that I was fascinated by the discussion on operational boards and policy boards. And if you could quickly say maybe what the purpose statements were for and what we are expecting to do with that.
Watch me deflect.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think this is the next step in understanding not just these are the buckets maybe we started sorting into from the very first meeting, actually, and we kind of then talked about that a little bit more last time. This is kind of saying, okay, so what would these do? If the function of some of these are going to be captured in here, what should we do? And I think Sherry just pulled in, these are the actual verbatim statements from our strategic plan.
Okay.
So that's what led us to this place. So eventually we're going to need to say if these are the ones that we're going to use, and this is just a suggestion, but if we were going to use these, then how do we describe the work of these bodies?
Okay.
Are we looking at
maybe-
this document?
Yes, advisory boards and commissions, ABC's alignment
Yeah,
with strategic
okay.
plan.
So I got, again, same question, where's the health department?
My recollection on the health department was it was in the category, and I was looking it up, it was in the category of it isn't one of the bodies that is completely controlled by the city. So it's a joint board with somebody else. In this case, it's the county.
What about the planning commission?
Same thing, it's
Same
city,
thing.
county, so we can think about it, but it's not actually, it's going to be held.
I know, but they're listed.
But it's also a statutory. I don't believe the health board is. That cities are required to have these. I do believe that the planning commission is a statutory required board that the city must have.
Yeah, I know that there's variation in where health departments are, yeah. Okay.
And it may be, when we get to further along here, that those boards and commissions that are not sort of involved in the pool that we're manipulating and testing and trying to decide how they look. The roles of those could possibly change. Well, I want to say, so they could be brought into the discussion once we've just talked about the commissions and boards that are part of our purview, essentially. It might be that some function of an existing committee might then fall under an existing board or commission that we're not tackling in terms of changing it.
But basically, if we leave it out, then it means we're not regularly wanting to be involved.
Not necessarily. I wouldn't interpret it that way. It is that we don't have control over the structure, form, or function independently as a city. So it will continue to exist exactly as it's written. All of those boards and commissions will, where we're a participant member, we don't have any authority. Now, that could be a separate project that would have to have the involvement of multiple jurisdictions to modify that. So it wasn't the undertaking of this body, of this commission.
Just thinking about the message. I'm on the board, that's why I'm doing this. Just thinking about the message that this is sending to the health department.
So on our, even just on our website, like the Public Health Board, we don't manage the agendas on our website. That all is on the health department. That's Lawrence Douglas County Public Health Department, but all of that information is on their board. It's not even managed on our site.
So other ones that are listed, Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. We're active participants. That's an important part of the city, but the city is only one part of that. Destination Management Incorporated, Douglas County Community Corrections Advisory Board, Douglas County Emergency Management. I mean, all ones that have a very relevant purpose in the city is actively participants. So there's a long list that are along with the health department.
Okay.
The Mental Health Board, Douglas County Food Policy Council, and the MPO. And I would say that I did talk to Jessica Mortinger, and she reminded me that some of the ones that we listed as task forces, those are actually MPO task forces. So those are subsets of MPO, so we really don't have direct control over them. So I wanted to.
And I've removed those from this, any of those steering committees that aren't permanent or the task forces, just so that we're talking about the kind of more permanent boards. And I think that's why initially we didn't have the planning commission on here in that first one, and then at the last meeting we realized they should be, is because they kind of fall in between both of those things we were just talking about.
And we may come back to some of those as we go through this. So it sounds to me like the purpose statements then, I mean, the meat of our discussion sounds like, and based on your discussion from the last time, and correct me if I'm missing something, was looking at these operating rules and procedures and this discussion of operational advisory boards, policy boards, task forces, that sort of category of things. So that sounds like a good jumping off point for this discussion, is what are those? And I guess I'll start by an initial just sort of basic question. Is there any rhyme or reason to something being called a board versus a commission? I understand a task force is a temporary thing, but in terms of these terms that are getting thrown around, is there a standard understanding of what those terms mean? So that they cannot be interchanged, they can be interchanged, maybe we could come up with just one.
I think the first thing you'd do is you'd go back and you'd look at their formative document, like whatever, statute, whatever city code, whatever city resolution created them. If they use a particular term, then out of the gate, it's a commission, it's a board, it's a whatever. But past that, I don't think there's any functional, I remember for a while there, when I was chair of BZA, I was calling people commissioners, and I don't know why, I just was. And then one day I realized, wait a minute, that's not correct. you know?
Okay, so once it's established in the resolution or ordinance, it just sort of follows through.
If they use that term there and that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that genesis, you know, then
Okay,
there it is, there's its name.
okay.
There's probably some deep history rooted in these. Where do they all come from?
Uh-huh.
You know, there's nationally, I mean, I've worked with aldermanic councils, you know, there is a rich history probably where all these things, these words come from in our language, but I don't think we've probably treated them.
All right, so we don't have to worry about what we're calling it, essentially. Okay, just want to make sure.
I was thinking at the last meeting we had, there was a comment about that boards typically have some authority where the committees did not, if I was remembering.
Danny Smith, yeah, I remember that also. Somebody, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Stan, who's not here, so I shouldn't speak for him. But
Right.
that commissions can only make recommendations, whereas boards have some amount of approval power.
Right.
Without it going on the consent agenda, essentially.
Mhm.
That's something that somebody mentioned. But it would be interesting to go and look through and check on that. To see if that actually pans out.
So we should just be mindful of that when we decide what to call these.
Tony's not able to be with us tonight. That would probably be a good thing for her to research and make sure there's no legal bind to that.
I think, too, that the difference between the policy board and the operating boards, I think, is absolutely crucial. And to new board members, that we to be clear. Because like when I was appointed on the Parks and Rec Board, I can't believe how long, I mean, we actually had to write to the city attorney to say, who are we actually advising? Are we advising the staff or are we advising the city commission? And, you know, it was sort of by implication, you're advising the city commission, but it's kind of weird because we never have any contact with the city commission.
Right.
But then I saw how different ways.
And
But
that was part
anyway.
of our discussion last time. It came up where we have some bodies out there that have sort of run past their mandate and they're still
Yeah.
out there chugging away. And there's some dissatisfaction among staff and the members, because what do we do? Well, then you have those that, like, say, are statutory, BZA, Planning Commission, they know what they're going to do. I mean, they sit down and they know exactly, they know the four corners of what they're going to do
Yeah.
in that particular meeting. And so that's a big deal, for sure.
But I think, you know, this business about who are we advising and who is the staff liaison and the role of the staff liaison. I mean, those things are very clear in print, but in practice, I don't know. I mean, I'm just talking with limited experience, but nevertheless.
But it sounded like from your last discussion that everybody here was intrigued by the idea of actually having an operational type of advisory board versus a policy board. So I'm wondering if there's further discussion. I mean, is that a model we want to go forward with of policy boards and operational boards? Or we probably need a little bit more discussion on what that entails, and maybe have some examples of what
From
these
a practical-
operationals.
This is the way I was thinking of it as we were talking about it, and everybody else, you can tell me if I was wrong, but it not only did it seem functionally like it would work, where staff could impanel folks, maybe subject matter experts, whatever they need, interact with them, get the information they need, and then, you know, then move on and, you know, you talk to the electeds or whatever you need to do, but it also served a great purpose because it serves as, when you take whatever recommendations we take at the end of this particular board or committee or whatever we are, before the electeds, they're going to ask you, what do we do with all of these entities that are sitting out here? You know, how do we explain this to ourselves? And there it is. It's like, we aren't really going to lose that capacity. We still retain it on an as-needed basis, but with staff. I felt like it was really, it seemed organic. You know, we'd still want to be able to access this community participation and involvement of subject matter experts and whatever, but we're going to do it in a more accessible and in a more nimble form. That's the way, that's how it struck me. And that's why I really jumped and said, I really like that. But that was just me personally.
There was some concern brought up in this meeting about making sure that that was accessible to the public, the sort of optics of that situation, where you could imagine somebody saying, well, that's just staff appointing somebody to give them a yes. And so there was a little bit of discussion about how we could make sure that that wasn't the impression or the optics for something like that. Were concerns about that? Should we discuss a little bit more how that would work? Well, let's step back and go the operation. Let's go back to the operational advisory body, whatever we're calling it, advisory body. So other thoughts on that advisory body? There was the concern about making sure it wasn't just
I think I brought
yes
that
people,
up, but it
and
was
then-
just more of a
Okay.
discussion point.
Okay.
And I think Craig brought up the example of the Sustainability Advisory Board, of how long that progressed through, and that might have been something that could have been worked on at the staff level, and we still have transparency, we still have accountability, because ultimately staff has to bring that to the city commission at city commission meetings. So it was more just kind of discussion, playing devil's advocate a little bit, of how do we ensure that we are speaking to accountability and transparency in the process. But I think this still ultimately flows through the city commission, and I do think some things we end up in the moment feel like this needs its own committee, it needs its own board, but really it probably can be done at the staff level, and working through it before it even gets to that point.
Yeah, I could definitely see it being the case where, there would be a bar that would be reached where, say staff could say, we want some amount of community input on this. Let's convene a body to do that as an operational advisory board. And then maybe once a certain level of engagement or amount of time, some sort of measure had been reached, it could be, become obvious, like this is, maybe we need to take this and expand it, or takes the next level. But I think it would be nice as a tool in the toolbox for the city to be able to convene those on staff discretion to get input.
So I have a question about that, because in reading through this is one of an operational advisory board would still have, as I read this, a 4-year term, but kind of part of this conversation sounds like it might be, why 4 years? I mean, for an operational advisory board, you might not need it for 4 years. Sometimes it sounds like a little bit like a task force, so.
Mm-hmm.
And just if I may,
Yeah.
this is just sort of kind of some things we pulled from other cities, what for you all to discuss and decide and give input on, and things that we think, would support that. I don't know if we're kind of moved on to the procedures, which is fine if we are, but some of that is in the establishment, kind of how you outline that in terms of the cities that we looked at, like Corvallis, how they handle it is they have their policy boards. And then and I think we talked about this at the last meeting, they just specifically say that the city manager can establish these operational boards. And sort of how that would happen, you would have to have an administrative policy that mirrors sort of the policy set out in code for the policy boards. So most of what's in there would not necessarily apply directly to the operational boards, but it really depends on how you want to set that up.
So would an operational board be something, were people throwing, I didn't hear too many examples. Would some of these, the finance types of things, would that be an operational board or a policy board? These, some of the tax incentives and the alcohol policy funds and those sort of things.
See, I would envision.
What sort of things would come under that?
I would envision everything that we're kind of trying to, that is, not everything, but the majority of the things that we've kind of found an outcome for within our strategic plan would be a policy, part of a policy board. Could be its own policy board, or could be part of a policy board, a larger policy board that encompasses all these. But like identifying and working through the implementation of a new finance system. Something like that would really, doesn't need to go through a policy advisory board, that really can just go, could be a task force that city staff puts together, or it could be part of an established operational board that we do have that does work through those processes. But a new finance system doesn't need to have a policy advisory board stamp of approval for it to get implemented. That's kind of how I was thinking of the difference. I don't know if that's correct or not.
So you're saying that most of these would be policies?
The ones that we've kind of lined out a lot of times, but I think we kind of talked about like the ones where we couldn't find an outcome for that was really more of a commitment, that maybe that is part of an operational advisory board. But that's just my recollection
What
of
do other people think in terms of, what are some maybe examples of some of the things we're working with that would be operational? That would be on an operational board versus a policy board?
I would say sales tax audit committee absolutely is, because there is no action that's being taken. We're receiving a report from Jeremy that says, here's how we spent the money. Here was the sales tax that we were using, and that can go to an advisory board to ensure, or operational board to ensure that we're spending it appropriately. And that report obviously goes to the city commission for review and approval. But I don't know that by itself needs its own advisory committee.
Well, wait,
Policy.
it would
Well,
be, you're
right,
thinking it's an
but-
operational.
Right, but right now it would be right now it's its own policy advisory board, and I don't think it needs to be that. I think that could fall under an operational.
This bullet, the next to last bullet point on operational boards, that seems to me to be a critical distinction.
Which, under
The
what you're,
next to last bullet point on operational boards, serve as technical advisors. That's not the kind of boards that I think about. I mean, to be a technical advisor, you need to have technical background. So, I mean, like Parks and Rec, it's not like, or Health Department, I don't, why do you need technical advisors?
Well,
I mean, if someone was trying to help implement a new finance software, they would probably need to have some technical device of.
I'd hire a consultant.
Yeah. Fair.
I mean, if,
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
it's all right.
I'm trying to think of where you would need a technical,
Nebulous.
I mean, I don't know.
Of course, looking from the road, I kind of think of an operational board and the technical advisor. I'm just going to give a scenario. Okay, so you've got your sustainability board. Now, the policy is clearly stated. But let's say you want to talk about the recycling effort of the city, okay? And you want to find out, is this $19 we're charging every household every month to recycle, which is my water bill, my utility bill is $65, $19 of it is for that cart that goes out to the curb. Now, if you want to advance that policy in its operation, you would have technical people that tell you, okay, we're putting this many pounds out to Ham Quarry and it costs this many dollars, and how much is actually going to a recycling center far away, and how much of it is getting baled and then later getting landfilled because there's no market for it. And that's a very technical question that's going to vary from time to time as markets change and costs change. So the sustainability board, you might consider an operational board, because people, the staff or city manager or even the commission could request information to advance the policy, which is already defined because it's part of the strategic plan. But the whole thing is technical.
Yeah, but I know, but why don't you just hire some people? I mean, why don't you ask Charlie Sedlock? I mean, I don't get that. I mean, I don't want to, I'm very sensitive about imposing on staff discretion. I want them to have contacts around the country. I want them to go to conferences. I want them to have the widest view of things, and that's their responsibility. How would you use who would be technical advisors? I mean, says people in the community who work in sustainability?
I think you would need sleuths. People who are good at finding things out when questions are asked of them.
Well,
Well, I mean, we do have, I think, which was the city that was using operational boards?
Corvallis.
Corvallis. And I didn't look at that recently to know what they outlined. I could imagine there'd be times like developing revenue forecasts and budgets. There's some resources at the university, for instance, that I would love to have if they would come and help.
well, that's an ad hoc thing, though.
Yeah, well, but it's an annual thing too.
You know?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just call it GFOA?
Well,
Government Finance Officers Association?
yeah, on how to put the budget together, I agree, but there could be insights that would be useful. There could be, anyway, I don't, and nothing comes directly to mind. I would say that some of these things we've had a lot of policy boards have done a lot of work on technical advising of bike lanes, the way that we're going to lay out pedestrian traffic controls, those sorts of things. We've seen a lot of, to me, that's a lot of technical work, but it's being done by policy boards. So I could see those things. Now, they do develop policies eventually, but those could probably be more like operating procedures and rules in some respects. But I'd say that's what would come to mind when you say technical advisory boards. And there's probably, as we see, there's lots of different ways to do this and what's right for this city.
And I'm wondering if make sure I have my language right, an operational advisory board necessarily means it's technical. I mean, it can involve technical people, technical advice, but not necessarily. So I'm thinking of the suggestion of the tax advisory, what's the proper?
The Sales Tax Audit Committee?
Whatever one, the one you're on.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe that's still operational, but you might not be a tax accountant or.
Well, you could take away that, you could eliminate that service technical advisors
Yeah.
and say service sounding board for city operations.
So
I don't
you would
know.
still be organizational in the sense of how, I come back to these financial committees because that seems to me, for some reason, sounds operational to me. How is the city going to spend its money? It's not really a policy. The city has these policies, they spend this money, but how best to include the community in advising the city to do that. So that kind of sounds operational to me, but you all might not be tax accountants or financial people.
So who's technically competent to do that?
Well, I don't think they need to be technically competent.
Well, it says
People in the
technical
city-
advisors.
Well, I'm suggesting that maybe
But
that
it's
might not be
technical a term of art.
necessary.
It's not being used as a term of art there. It's just a term, right? If it's a term of art, then it means something.
And it does say and/or sounding board for city operations, so it's not specific to just technical advisors. We're giving ourselves an option of one or the other. It doesn't have to be both.
There's plenty of people in the city that says, okay, here's down to the cents what we can spend, and we just want some advice on spending it.
I can see having the and Travis has said this last time, giving a little bit of flexibility to staff to do things in a nimble and efficient way. So if there is an operational board, maybe there is a situation where they don't have the technical expertise to do that, but that board can say, let's form a task force, let's get technical individuals involved, and maybe it's not people donating their time, but maybe in that situation, that board says, hey, we need a consultant. Let's just bring a consultant in, we'll oversee the process, and it's stuck at the operational level as opposed to having a policy advisory board trying to manage that process as well.
Okay, well, I'll back away from it. I mean, I just, if there's not a lot of sympathy for it, then, you guys are fine.
Well, this is, we're just starting out with these words. I
Yeah.
mean, it'll be wordsmithed.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I just, I just
at some
remember
point,
being on
yeah.
the city commission, and the last thing, I was so frustrated when city commissioners act as experts. Give me a break, will you?
Mm-hmm.
You're not a traffic engineer. Why are you talking about whether we need a stop sign here or not? Ask the traffic engineer.
And I think this can be wordsmithed to reflect that, so
Okay.
that it's not just technical advisors
Right.
that run these operational.
Yeah, and I think to your point of not handcuffing staff, I think this does the opposite. I think this gives staff a little bit more leash to kind of do what they need to do to continue to move policy and
So
operations
maybe
forward.
like a sounding board type
Right.
thing. Okay.
Other comments on, at some point, I imagine we'll get, if we agree that one of the recommendations we can make is we're going to have this entity, these operational advisory bodies, we might get to the point where we start saying, okay, well, this particular board and commission that currently exists fits in that category or does not. Or, so with the policy advisory boards then, it's been suggested that most of these fall into. So if we look at those, do we think that they do all their purpose, getting back to the purpose statements, fit under policies, determining policies for the city? Do we see any that maybe are not acting that way?
Yeah, B. Smith, we've talked a lot about the operational versus policy and sort of where that lies. And for me, and I feel like it's been touched on a little bit, it's really about whether or not the work of the body is going to push, potentially, maybe not necessarily, but potentially push the city to reorient a little bit in one direction or another, influence the direction things are going, versus is it just maintenance or maintaining, and with like the sales tax audit committee, I don't think that their work is ever going to necessarily lead the city to, change course on how it's functioning. And I think there's a couple others that could maybe, and again, we've talked about these bodies a decent amount, but I'm still not an expert on them. But if like the Body Work Advisory Board, from my understanding, that's largely kind of a regulatory oversight board. So they exist so that folks who are doing that work can apply, and they provide an amount of oversight guaranteeing that those people are operating within the expectations of practitioners of body work in the city. So I don't know if they would really, to me, and maybe this isn't true, but to me it doesn't seem like they would necessarily be pushing the city in any new directions as far as how that work is done, just providing oversight, which doesn't, I'm not saying it automatically makes them an operational board, but I think that's kind of how I'm thinking about the distinction between policy versus sort of procedural, operational.
Hannah Ballard, this might be helpful in just framing the conversation around operational boards and the technical piece. So something we're thinking about for the community engagement commitment, and this is very much modeled on what Boulder has, is called a Community Connectors program. And they have 8 people who apply to be community connectors, and they are charged with helping the community engagement program co-create community engagement strategies for various projects. And the community connectors are assigned out to specific projects. So I think there's a Parks and Rec master plan update. They assign 2 community connectors to that project to help them co-create their community engagement strategies. They assign, 2 community connectors to the Affordable Housing Strategic Plan, help them think about and do community engagement in an intentional way, and potentially based on the community engagement that grows out of the Community Connectors program, it could change the direction of the city in some ways, right? Because we want to listen and act on the feedback we receive. So I just put that example out there as something to consider and think about as you talk about operational boards. It might not just be sales tax audits. It could be something a little bit more community focused.
So maybe something, I can see a crossover between policy and operational, something like the Multimodal Transportation Commission, where you have a lot of operational stuff going on. Just where should the next bike lane be? That kind of thing, versus we really need to find ways to connect our public transportation, to emphasize public transportation and get people out of their cars. Sort of more of a policy thing. So I see that as sort of, how you parse that when you have a board or commission like that, that probably has 2 roles. Maybe the connector is part of that, trying to figure that, but I could see there's some high-level policies with multimodal transportation in terms of the city direction. But there's also, where's the next bike lane gonna go? So you mentioned, Craig, that there were these subcommittees within, or task forces within the multimodal transportation. Is there a model maybe for having a high-level policy discussion at the level of the commission, but then their various task forces, committees, subcommittees, whatever we would call them, to be more operational and informed? Then you have the city commission appointing one, as I understand this outline here, and then the staff appointing something else.
Yeah, again, these are just starting points, pulling in some of the examples that we've looked at other places. We need to make this what functions well for us. And I'd also say we're not bound to what we have right now. So we keep going back to the same ones that are in existence now. Maybe we need completely different ones. So that, I'm not sure that responds directly to what you're saying, but the we're trying. It brings up a good one. We're trying to bring people in to co-create with us. It's their community, and instead of being the experts deliver service, we're working together with you to do this work for the city. So it is a bit of a paradigm shift in the operational delivery that it is just starting. I mean, it really is. So I think we envision that we will figure out ways to bring people in that are interested, that have skill sets and interests to help us connect with the city a little bit better, rather than your only point is either come to one of these boards and commissions that has a very specific purpose that's been traditional, or come for 3 minutes at the city commission meeting on Tuesday nights. And we think that that engagement can be much better served that way. So that's what we're trying to figure out with this operational. There's something there, we think.
We're trying to move out of the archaeological world.
And it occurs to me, there's 2 things going on there: is staff wanting to engage with interested citizens regarding, whatever, and getting some, some fresh ideas in the room and everything, but also it's useful for fleshing out landmines. It's like, well, we didn't think of that. It's like, we didn't realize, oh yeah, that's an issue, isn't it? Okay, because that's always the big deal, is you want that landmine to be detected before Tuesday night at the commission meeting when somebody is really upset about it. So you really do want to find it at that level, so you can start working the issue early. And I think that's a good way to find those as well. Just that direct link with the community.
Yeah, another one that just keeps coming to mind, because I live in the neighborhood, but there was a lot of work put into the traffic calming work in Old West Lawrence. And that was a lot of technical staff stuff, even consultants coming in, but it was enriched and made much better through the iterative process of engagement with the neighbors that are there, that had great passions, great diverse passions about what should or shouldn't happen. If we wouldn't have done that, we could have said, this is safe, it meets the technical definitions, there you go. It is slowed traffic, we can demonstrate it is slowed traffic, you cannot go from this street to this street, much slower, lower traffic volumes. But it wouldn't have negotiated those value conflicts that also can be in a safe way designed and implemented. So that model keeps coming to mind too, of that didn't necessarily need to be something that the city commission was going to adopt a policy on, but it was the implementation of good, technically correct practices in a way that worked with the neighborhood.
Yeah, and then downstream, I can speak to that, because then, folks in Old West Lawrence would come to the Association of Neighborhoods meetings, and they were really happy with the outcomes. They spoke, they were appreciative of the outcomes, they liked the flow, how they got there, working with staff. And then following on downstream to your point about connectors, is now you have, some people there that the next time you want to do something like that in the neighborhood, you could actually loop one of those people that were in that original project, and you could, ask them if they want to be in the room while we help this next neighborhood take this journey. And I think there would be great insights and institutional knowledge there to supplement what staff is doing. So, there was potentially a lot of synergistic effects just from that one endeavor.
So did that happen through the staff having public meetings? Was that in front of the multimodal? Was it in front of a board or commission that a lot of this got talked out?
Yes.
You're nodding to both.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
There were lots of pieces to it. There were
Okay.
groups that would roam around the neighborhood in packs, talking and looking. And there were long meetings. There were neighborhood meetings that I don't think involved staff, that were trying to reconcile, interests. So I think all of those are a really good city designs and figures out how to do that and makes that a formal way of, this is just how we do things here.
So how would that fit into that sort of model, that sort of operation that was successful, fit with what we've got listed here in terms of structuring these boards and commissions? What would that look like?
I think that's outside of the realm of boards and commissions.
Well, but
that's-
if it was brought before the multimodal commission, if it was brought before some form of transportation commission, that was a piece of it. So you had all this going on the ground, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, you had
Yeah.
all this stuff going on the ground, and meetings happening, staff putting together public meetings, but eventually it happened, there was a discussion before some board, before the city commission? Do I have that right?
How did that thing get going, like with the traffic calming in Old West Lawrence?
Well, the consultants it was part of this
It was
consultants'
consultant thing.
work that was to engage the public in this work, but I think multimodal was multimodal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was.
Okay.
Was the group that officially kind of said, yeah, this is what's going to happen.
Okay.
So we're skipping a couple steps. We're skipping the consultant. We're skipping multimodal and getting straight to, we think we've identified some need, in this case, traffic calming in a neighborhood. Staff reaches out to some interested people, even people that have been through the process previously, for their insights, and then we get going. Yeah, it works to me. You've already cut 2 steps out of the process, brought people into the room that have direct experience with that sort of thing. The concept really, really appeals to me, and it really works. But sometimes it'll fall on its face, because sometimes you won't be able to get anybody interested. But other times, it'll really work.
So what are you saying about the role of the existing commission in that? Was it necessary?
If staff, because one of the things that's going to happen here is stuff that has been, however, delegated out to these boards and committees or whatever, is going to return to staff. They're going to start carrying this water. But, we're acknowledging that we still want the community involved in these decisions and whatnot. And staff, this is Lawrence, and we have got a good problem here. Staff wants to be involved with citizens. And this is a good way to bring them in to the process.
This is Hannah Ballard. I would add in about Old West Lawrence. I don't want to detract from anything Craig said. Our staff did amazing work on that. The neighborhood was so engaged and really showed up. I, maybe from a process standpoint, wouldn't hold that up as the model of what we want to do going forward. It wasn't necessarily proactive community engagement as much as we were responding to what we heard. And going forward, we would much rather identify these stakeholders early, bring them into the conversation early, and make sure that we don't, that they're at the table and that they're a part of that conversation right from the outset. So I was just acknowledging that y'all were asking questions about that process, and we can share that information, but I would just say not exactly the model we want to follow going forward, even though everyone did incredible work on that project and it was a great outcome.
Do you want to talk just a little bit about the meeting? I'm getting ahead of, we're over-promising, under-delivering probably, but the CIP conversation you had with the engineering staff?
Yeah, absolutely. 2 weeks ago, we, our community engagement commitment got together with municipal services and operations, their engineers and their project managers, all of whom now are IEP2 trained, which is the International Association of Public Participation. It's a pretty rigorous training. They're 2 levels in. And we sat around a table for 2 hours and went project by project through the capital improvement plan. So looking at everything from the Jayhawk watershed, right, to I'm trying to think of some other projects that were on there. I don't know, some other infrastructure projects. There's a lot. And over those 2 hours, they were really willing to look at the scope of each project and try to think about what the appropriate level of community engagement was for that project. So IAP2 has a spectrum that I provided during the first meeting. It starts with involve. There are 5 total steps all the way up to empower, which is allowing someone to vote on something. We don't do that very often. But it was really so heartening to see these engineers sit around this table and dig into, how they can bring the community along on the journey of every project, right? And how we can make sure people have the information they need and are helping us co-create solutions. And so that is really a model of a process, of a decision-making process that we are actively building internal capacity for at this city. And that's what we want to see more of. So yeah, I would hold that up as an exemplar process that is underway as I speak.
And that might involve an advisory board, a task force, a project committee of stakeholders in the affected group. Sometimes it's residents, sometimes it might not be residents, sometimes it might be businesses. And so I think this is opening the door for, we're expected to, but our plan is to do that more often. Whereas what you have right now is the project's about ready to get approved by the city commission. It's already been designed. We've spent sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars in design, and it's months along. And now a resident found out about it, and they're going to show up Tuesday night.
Yep.
And they're going to say, that you can't do this. Did you know that this, cuts my tree down? Well, that's not right. And so, well, wait a minute. Maybe we should talk about that. No, we're going to go ahead anyway. Well, why'd you do that? So we think this process incorporates it in an early stage, gets the right people in at the right times so that real change can be made in the process. These are technical projects, but we're seeing that boards and commissions are getting the work now, but probably at the wrong times.
Or I remember, you can't cut down this tree, but more substantively, I'm going to get in trouble for saying that. I can remember being at BZA one time, and there was something before us, and a community member came in and talked about, did you know there's a gigantic gas main running right under there? Like, what? Wait, what? What gigantic gas main running right under there? Where you want to start doing, get a variance and start doing construction. It's like, I think you would flush. Sometimes there's things more than trees dwelling in the weeds, you know what I mean? And apparently staff went and vetted that, and there was a gigantic gas main running right through, the corner of this property, which completely changed the landscape of the whole issue. But yeah, I mean, if you can find that out early, then you can work all that stuff out to everybody's satisfaction and save a lot of time, a lot of resources.
That kind of sounds like forming these, in the realm of task forces for specific projects and these operational bodies we've been talking about, where they're a little bit more nimble. They do all this work before it gets to the city or county or city commission. So I guess what I'm wondering is where the policy advisory boards are living in this world. If all this work would be done, as an example with the CIP, under possibly task forces and operationals, I mean, where is it where we really need a public forum and an advisory board and commission to advise the city? Like, where is that operating? At what level are those boards operating? To pick an example, Human Resources Commission, Cultural Arts Commission, maybe some examples where it's more advising the direction of the city, and some people who are serving on those committees could speak far better than I can of these, this sort of higher level. And how are they going to act? I mean, is it just going to be people come before the committee, like they come before the planning commission and just speak their mind at this high level, and then the commission then advises the city commission? I mean, so, because this is a whole different operation and a lot of grassroots operation, whereas some of these policy boards, if they're up here, how are they going to operate to advise the commission, and on what sorts of topics and issues are they going to operate?
Well, when it came in Parks and Rec, you know, we had this decision about admission fees to the rec centers, and I think a systematic engagement, you know, an IP2 type engagement would have really been useful in legitimizing whatever public opinion there was. I mean, we ended up doing a good job, I think, but nevertheless, you know, it was like you said, it was the public comment there were a lot of people came in. I would have much preferred a more organized way of gathering public input and working through some of the issues. I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, when you get out, I mean, this spectrum, there's this spectrum, and so, you know, one of them is it goes beyond informing the public in a public meeting. It goes, you know, talking about, well, we're consulting you versus we're empowering you. I mean, there are different ways of looking at that, and I think that would have really helped. You know, the process would have helped.
Yeah, Hannah Ballard, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I think where that one fell down is, you know, we're building our internal capacity for this work, so we're still learning a lot about how to do it. And also, it takes a long time to do it well, and that's something we're learning as a staff too, about how to build in appropriate amounts of time to co-create solutions with our community, because it's worth it, but it's resource intensive. And so, yeah, your point is well taken, John. I appreciate you making it.
So what does that mean for a policy board? What does that look like then?
Well, following up on what
Go ahead.
Dr. Nalbandian was just saying, tell me if I'm wrong, but in that case, you know, I would imagine Parks and Rec is going to keep on going, despite what we do here. Just, you know, it is what it is. But the thing is in the instance of, hey, we're thinking about charging fees to access rec centers around town. So first we paraphrase that old Supreme Court saying where it's like, I can't explain it to you, but I know it when I see it. Well, I think staff would have said, yeah, that one's going to be a hot button one. And you could have formed one of these operational advisory boards. And, you know, you tell the Parks and Rec board, you know, we're going to form this operational advisory board just to just go out into the community and flesh out some ideas and some reactions and whatnot before we come to you, and where this, you know, where the rubber meets the road and we'll really start talking about whether we're going to do this or not. I mean, these two things, even where Parks and Rec, you know, remains one of these, you know, boards, even after this process, staff can still use these policy advisory boards to assist that board and the road staffers.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they can exist in the same space and very synergistically, you know, and avoid what Dr. Nalbandian was talking about is a room full of people very concerned at a Parks and Rec meeting, you know, for the first time getting heard on these
Yeah.
issues.
So that's, as you describe it, it's sort of like a last step before, I mean, all this work comes out and they come before the Parks and Rec Board for the final recommendation
Yeah.
to the city commission. It's one more public forum, one more
Well-
batting around of,
Really broadly,
Yes.
I've always seen it as there's any of these are right decisions, technically correct decisions. What's the right one for this community? That's a great place for the staff not to be the ones making the decision if we don't have to. These are all okay choices. So, you know, I see it as things like staying with Parks and Recreation. Well, there are people that probably would say, I don't want a golf course, I just want a skate park. And if you ask them, and they were making the decision, they say, don't spend any money on a golf course, do it on this. And there's probably people that do the complete opposite. What's the right balance? I think those balancing things, those are probably good policy decisions. That's for resource application. But I think there's also, you know, is it okay to have off-leash dog parks or not, and how many times? There's rule setting. Some of those things I think are probably what's right for our community. So those are, you know, just generally, and you all do the work, and your boards, you have good examples probably from the work that you do of what's a policy decision. Again, the ones that are easy are the statutory ones that said, yep,
Yeah.
you're always going to make that decision, but even those are really, they're given to you because it isn't appropriate for staff to make the technically right answer. A bunch of neighbors disagree, and you need to be the ones that decide that amongst yourselves.
do you think it's possible to just take that thought right there in terms of what a policy board would be doing, and take a look at what, I mean, in a very broad sense, what types of decisions need to be made for this city? I mean, rather than going, I mean, one way to do it is just to go through our list and say, yeah, that one counts, that one counts, that one counts, at doing that. Or thinking, okay, what types of decisions are those decisions that are what's right for our community type of decisions? If I can garble my sentences.
DLB Smith, I mean, to me, I feel
Yeah.
like it's going to have to be just kind of like the work of all boards and commissions. It's going to have to ultimately be relatively issue by issue. But I think having some standard, a range of standard procedures is nice, including operational boards, task forces, and also policy boards. So something could come up like Parks and Rec fees, and somebody, I think, pretty quickly could make a call that this is something the Parks and Rec board is going to need to have input on, but also this is going to be a hot button issue where we should probably go ahead and maybe let the Parks and Rec board know this is something we want to explore, and we're going to convene some of those community input groups at that sort of elevated level. Because I certainly know for me on the Cultural Arts Commission, there's all sorts of stuff we do that it would be completely inappropriate to convene an external group of community members. It's really like issue by issue, and I think the context, larger context, is really what policy boards provide. Because for us, you know, we might look at a mural and then a proposal and all these different things, the Cultural Arts Commission, and for us, really, it's all about this larger context of how we feel like people value and want to see cultural arts in Lawrence. So I think weaving that tapestry of all those different things, and I'm sure Parks and Rec is very similar with all of those sorts of things. So I think the context, larger context, and thinking of the entire vision of how our community embraces that, whatever it is what the policy boards are really sort of trying to piece together. And while there might be certain projects or certain issues that are something that would need to be drilled down on, that could be sort of an issue by issue sort of exception to the normal operating procedure. That's kind of how I'm imagining it. I certainly don't, I don't think we would want to have every mural proposal have an outside listening group or whatever.
But what you just said about knowing when something comes up before, knowing with this, with a document like this that says that we can say right away, oh, that's going to be under this process. That's going to be a policy decision, that's going to be an operational board, that's going to be a task force. To come up with at least an outline so that it's easy for the city to identify.
Easy,
What-
no, but you
but
can lay
you-
out some,
no.
some thoughts, some
Right.
aspirational guidelines, you know, if implicates this, or this, you should think about, you know, you should think about an operational advisory board. You could do that, but still, it's case by case for sure. And I would think that staff, once staff gets used to the idea of that these operational advisory boards can be a thing, and two, kind of factoring in the lead time to use them, I would think that Craig might be dealing with a new problem, which is a lot of operational advisory boards, you know, being floated.
Well, Hannah's right. You do the work in the front end instead of the back end, and it works a lot better, so.
And you do it throughout the process as well, not just once, but you employ a variety of techniques over the course of the life cycle of a project, so that when you arrive at the decision moment, you've co-created it.
So part of our task then is I mean, in terms of going forward, suggestions please, in terms of which, we can look at it as which of these things, bodies that are before us, do they seem to lean to one or the other, like sort of an operational sort of thing, or do they rise to the level of, yes, there's a role for an advisory board? And we can go through the existing ones, we can come up with new ones where there are gaps. I mean, what do you think might be the best way to try to tackle that
No
a
matter,
really big
no
question?
matter what we do, what I would love, and you can say no, but what I would love is an anonymous poll of staff, if they would tell us which one of these they think are ripe for being, you know, reshaped into an as-needed operational advisory board. I really, really, given that we found some interesting things from the staff survey that came back to us, you know, staff said, these people fight, these people, they don't have any purpose. I dread going to this meeting. There were some really juicy sound bites there from that survey. I really want to hear from them, you know, in an anonymous fashion. You know, what do they think of this? You know, because they're tip of the spear. They're the liaisons with these things. But yet, you know, I think we have a valid voice too. We're here to talk, to speak for the community, you know?
Deanna Smith, I would certainly be interested in seeing some anonymous staff survey results, but at the same time, I feel like there's a decent chance that some of the boards where the staff liaisons have a worse time, I'm not gonna say bad time, but have a worse time, that might be symptomatic, not necessarily of the board's function being unnecessary, but that the board itself isn't necessarily cohesive in their mission, and maybe some of the training and some of that stuff that the board members go through. That could be where some of that friction is coming from. I feel like there's probably some boards out there, maybe in our city, but definitely in other places, where the actual function of the board is super important, and then the way the board operates is really painful, and people can dislike serving in a staff position with the board for either of those separate reasons. So I do still think that'd be interesting to see. I think it could definitely it could inform some of the decisions we make, but I think there are probably both of those things going on somewhere. The board maybe is off the rails a little bit, or maybe the function it serves would be better served by a different body, or maybe it's just not operating in the way that it should.
So do you think it would be more fruitful to take this high level we're on with the policy boards and some of the committees, boards we're dealing with, and then go through sort of how the structure, because you mentioned the training and the terms and the who can be a member and how they're appointed, and then do that as the second step? Or do we want to take this document and sort of go through how they're structured before getting to I mean, where would people feel more comfortable dealing with, coming up with sort of an initial, let's discuss these committees and what they look like, initial discussion, or go through how they would, whatever we come up with, eventually be structured.
Daniel B. Smith, I'm certainly interested in looking over some of the structural things. and
Okay.
Sort of pointing out, because for me, in my dream world
Yeah.
where I can magically recreate all the boards in an instant, there's definitely some things that I feel like the existing boards, not the nature of the boards or the fact that those boards exist, but maybe some structurally where I have questions, and I feel like things could be streamlined. So I think looking at the sort of little rubric of structure, and maybe, I don't know if anybody else has looked through this and found little things where it's like, that seems like an area where there could be improvement or standardization, but that sounds incredibly boring to everybody.
No. Well, other thoughts on, you know, what would be the first step and what would be the second step in my limited scenario here? in terms
Have
of
we
what
already identified, have we already divided the boards into operational and
Oh,
policy?
no.
Well, it might be
No.
interesting, it's the operational boards is what's complicated to me, and it might be interesting just to say, well, which of the boards that exist would qualify as operational boards?
Okay, so that's two different directions. Looking at how our existing boards and kind of just talking about what style they are, of course, based on our high-level discussions, or going through the structure of what each would look like without identifying anything that exists. What do you think would be most helpful for our discussions, where we're eventually getting to?
Would you like to go next?
Nobody, okay.
Just use
Like to go
his
next?
prerogative and
All
tell
right,
us.
okay.
Here we go.
I just want to make sure, I want everybody to participate in this direction that we're going, because we're going
Right.
to spend a lot of time with it.
Sometimes it's not an either or and it's an and both. So I always like to know where we're going before we even start, you know, like what is our true intention, is what you had said earlier, what kind of decisions do we want these policy boards making? So in order to make sure that we know what kind of decisions they're making, we have to have an idea of what they are, and then to know what the procedures are and who's capable of participating on the boards, we kind of have to know what those boards are, whether it's operational or policy boards. So I'd have a hard time personally saying this person, the membership for this board would fit in that same criteria if it's very technical. If it's planning commission, if it's, I don't know, I've never been on planning commission, maybe there's some experience necessary on that, where maybe a safe and secure policy advisory board doesn't require as much technical expertise as one over the other. So I'd hate to create these generalization
Okay, I'm
membership.
just trying to give us a little.
Yeah, so it's, to me, I don't want to necessarily make all the decisions of here's all the advisory boards, but if it's, we have a pretty strong idea that here's the decisions that we want to be made, so that's what's going to inform what these policy boards are, then we can kind of move forward with, that's how are we going to actually operate these these boards, and who do we want serving on those boards?
Sherry has been dying to say something.
Well, I think that's always sort of one of the issues you run into when you create something like this to help, you know, spur discussion is, you know, this is something to think about and talk through, and maybe just sort of the formation of this might be helpful in terms of the direction that you all go. So again, Corvallis was one we really looked at. We looked at other cities too, and they have policy boards that are established by the commission. They then allow the city manager to create operational boards. So all of these standards apply to policy boards. City manager then would create an administrative policy that mirrors this for those boards. That's how they do it. And I have theirs pulled up. I can give you examples of how they've used those operational boards. But there's, you know, it is difficult because depending on the boards you do, the you know, based on those things, it might be different on how you use that. They have their Parks and Rec as an operational board that may not work for us as a city, like Craig said. So it really is flexible and up to you, and something you all will have to consider. But really, when we look at advisory boards, that's sort of what the commission is going to set in code and codify, and we're going to have rules and procedures of operations for them. When we met at our meeting, we gave, kind of think outside the box. It doesn't just have to be committees, commissions, task forces, how we do that. We even touched briefly on what Hannah talked about as connectors. Wasn't something we really talked about, so we didn't bring much information back about that. But there was some interest in operational boards, so sort of how that has functioned in other cities is what's laid out here. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe going through this and looking at how these different committees would be described and how they would function. As you just said, so their structure would help bring up a lot more questions, I'm sure. And then we can do this a little bit later with fitting those boards in to the structure that we're going to look at.
And so typically, when
Operating
codified,
rules.
you would say what those policy boards are, and then they would all have the same sort of general rules, but then there might be specific rules, like planning commission, or certain boards where they have a specific county appointee, or we want someone from a United Way, that would be specifically laid out. Generally, operational boards are not laid out in code. But again, that's all at your discretion, but that just gives you sort of how this outline is to get you thinking about options.
Okay, well, then that sounds like a good place to start, the operating rules and procedures, just fleshing them out a little bit with this. Does anybody need a break? Restroom? No? Okay. So operating rules and procedures for policy advisory boards and commissions. So we've talked a lot about, we all have at least in mind now, sort of a general idea of what operational sort of means and what policy boards sort of mean. So we have the appointments, which seems pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any discussion points on who would be making the appointments for these various entities? Because that seems pretty straightforward. What about membership?
B. Smith, is there anything in here that, I feel like the various sizes of the bodies is interesting to me, and not to literally go back to the thing we just talked about, not talking about, but I feel like the different sizes of the boards is one of the things that started to make me kind of think a little bit about how the structure and the lack of uniformity, I feel like that might show some of the differences. I was surprised how small some are, and I feel like maybe some that are a little more operational might end up being a little bit smaller. There's nothing that says the size. So I'm curious historically if anybody has any idea why AHAB is 13 versus the Aviation Advisory Board being 7. I mean, obviously in the ordinance or charter that created those bodies, that is there a rhyme or reason beyond trying to avoid accidentally having a quorum when you run into somebody at a sandwich shop? Or?
Not that I am aware of. In some instances, it's because they wanted a certain representatives. Some are very representative of certain groups, and so the contractors for 3 different types of contractors for the board is escaping me, but the appeal board for building codes. But in general, I think it's just whatever the commission had in mind at the time.
So to that point, the membership and recruitment and how many members, is that something that has to be set at the outset? So at the end of this exercise here, that's something that has to be set, is how many members will be in there? Or is that something, I don't know how that could be really discretionary at the
No, I think you're.
formation of the board, it has to be set, right?
Yeah, I think your advice would be useful. And you notice something that's unusual, that's part of your charge, is to develop a new system that works much better for the city. So if there isn't any known reason why something is 13 versus 5, I would also say there's a ballot issue coming up, so we likely will have 7 members up here. And you see that's more of a central tendency here, so maybe prescribe to say 7. And that could align with who people may have for different geographic districts. Might be.
So when we come up with our list, let's say final list, that would include this particular board is going to have 7, this particular board is going to have 10, this particular board
Or
is
you
going to have
may
5. That would be
standardize it.
our advice.
Or you may standardize it. I mean, it could be it could well be standard. That would be a simpler thing. If there's no real reason not to, then
Okay.
we all understand that's always how it is.
Okay.
Is there any research that speaks to high-performing boards and the number of appointees to any of those boards?
I
Again,
haven't found any.
I haven't found any.
no, it's kind of all over the board. But again, some cities that have done this restructuring, stuck with some of the boards that they have, didn't change membership that much.
Somebody mentioned quorum. I mean, when you have 3, you can't talk.
Yep.
Right.
You get 5, you can start to have conversations. 7, then a couple of different conversations without breaking quorum.
Craig, you ought to propose a session for the ICMA conference on boards and commissions.
Well, I was at the one last year on this subject. That's how I got these two.
Oh,
They actually had a session. I said, this is perfect,
Oh.
because I'm overdue in getting this going. So.
yeah. I'm
Well, the-
sorry, but I forget your name, but I would love to hear what you are just thinking about this whole thing.
Well, my name is Sherry Ellenbecker.
Okay, Sherry.
Yeah, we got the 2 Sherrys
Yeah.
next to each other, so to me, a lot of it stems from the commissioners not having a personal staff to advise them on things. I've always thought that each commissioner should have staff, like a congressman or a senator has staff that comes and says, here is what we found about this issue. And so you go to these advisory boards, and by definition, I mean, not by definition, but they are people who have time. They are the 1%ers that can be there. And they are not the meat and bones of the community. They are not the people that are working out at Hills 3 to 11. And so you have a real disconnect between the people that are advising and the people that are being impacted by ordinances, regulations. And that huge disconnect is what causes the discord in the city. All we know is that when Rock Chalk Park was built, we were told that every one of those basketball courts was going to be open every weekend. And suddenly, they were leased to here and leased to there. And you want us, we're cynical. Sure we are. I mean, because we're disconnected. And so I see an open invitation to operational boards as something that moves it down a little bit to make it more accessible so that people who are hesitant to come forward because when they call planning commission, they get somebody who uses about a bunch of $10 words and basically disses them on the phone. So they're not going to call again because, it's not worth their time. They're going to go back to work. And so I think anything that can be done to pull them off of big sounding boards and make them things that people want to engage in would do a lot to lower the temperature of the disharmony in this community that perhaps some people don't even perceive, but is there.
So to that point, Sherry, that point that you just made, when we look at recruitment for these boards, you talked about bringing it down in terms of, so what additional things do you think might be included in this membership and recruitment idea to get to that, to bring more people to,
That's a
into the
good question. I mean, almost it has, I mean, for me, it was something that impacted my life, so I sort of became as engaged as I can. I don't have the answer, but I think that making them from, I'm just going to say that I don't have the sustainability board, to some kind of, community liaison for the environment, if, something like that, so that it would be more where average people that have a grocery bill budget, and it doesn't include 715, feel like they can come forward and that they would be valued.
And could come forward, because it's not as intimidating as being nominated by the mayor and approved by the city commission, and then feeling like, okay, so you're telling me I have to make sure that I'm available, at least once a month for several hours a night and whatever, but no, it's like, this is something, maybe it's one-off, it directly affects my neighborhood, and, city manager's office is called, and they're pretty accessible, and they'd like my input on this, so it certainly makes it more accessible. It definitely makes it more accessible for those people to get into the room and feel comfortable enough to, share whatever input they can bring.
Well, I think the engagement initiatives are designed in part to make sure there's a wide variety of people involved.
and that speaks to how this recruitment piece, so maybe there is some looking forward, what these things are called,
Yes.
how they're advertised in the community for the recruitment, and that's, of course, what you'll be specializing in, is getting that word out. But maybe looking at the name, looking at where it is advertised. Because right now, I know a lot of it is just word of mouth and begging and pleading, at least from what I've seen.
DMB Smith, I think we start talking about membership numbers, and I think that standardizing membership numbers is good, partially because it makes it easier to communicate what the boards and commissions are, if they're all similar or follow a pattern, so that each one is at least somewhat similar. I feel like it makes it easier to communicate out what they are and what they do. But I definitely feel like it's a sort of how you're talking about making sure that the community is truly represented. It's a balancing act, because if you get a board or commission too large, it can become a little bit unwieldy, and it can require more and more staff time. Too small, you might not have enough literal seats in the room to reflect the community. And you want to strike that balance. But I do think, I have a lot to say as far as recruitment. I feel like recruitment and membership go back and forth. And one big, under recruitment, it lists commissioners, board members, and the city manager as being the primary folks who are recruiting. But to me, I feel like if we do want to, I feel like those two first bullet points kind of conflict with each other, because the second one of having a duty to recruit members from groups that have traditionally been underrepresented by city government, if our goal is to get folks who have been underrepresented, but then the people who are supposed to do the recruitment are the commissioners, current board members, and the city manager, it's like those are the people who are the most represented. So it's like, how do we expect
Yeah,
those
it is
people
hard.
to already be in contact with the people who are underrepresented? And so, I do communications. That's my day job. And so I feel like the reality, and I know that part of our responsibility or part of our goal is to kind of lower some of staff, how much energy staff's putting into this. But I feel like really the answer as far as recruitment is that staff needs to actually dedicate time specifically to educating and promoting the existence of these bodies, and then also encouraging people and explaining to them that they do have the capability and skills. I think I even mentioned this at a previous meeting. I think one thing with the operational boards and some of this other engagement, which could be really useful, and another reason why I think that's a good tool in the toolbox, is that it can be kind of like a little league, or not little league, what's the other one? Minor league. Like a minor league on-ramp for people into full board service. But and again, I apologize since part of our goal is to reduce staff work. I think that the reality is it's going to be more work if we want to make sure that the folks who are serving are representative of the community. More work in a different way, though.
It's just better aligned, not reduced.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
And in the long run, it might actually be easier, because if you talking about what you've just described here with the new processes that you're going through, the more people that are involved, the more recruits you possibly have, because you get to know people, you get to know the people that show up to the meetings for this particular issue or that particular issue, and then it becomes easier to recruit for staff. So I can see a high level of work at the start when you get this whole process going, but eventually, as more and more people become engaged, they're more willing.
And if people are coming into board service having had some of these previous experiences and a little bit more training, I feel like you might see less friction within the operation of those boards. That's the recruitment thing's forever going to be my soapbox. So, I'm sure we'll touch on that again.
One example of unintimidating, really good in community engagement was when they redesigned the bus routes. They had these little tables with 2 people, just normal-looking people, and they had a little sign, tell us about the bus route, and I mean, I saw them all over the place. And that was really good, because they just looked, and I mean, I could see almost anybody saying, whatever they wanted to say to these folks. That was one example where the city really did it right.
Yeah, and then you have a table. Did you enjoy this? Would you like to become a part
Well,
of
yeah.
the decision-making? Have a recruitment at each event where you're saying, hey, this is how this is going to work. Would you like to become involved?
Yeah. Tables at the farmer's market.
Yeah, things like that.
Well, it is, I mean, you all probably heard, when you say I'm serve on this board, well, I wouldn't want to do that. I mean, sadly, I hear that regularly, because I would never want to be a city manager, and it breaks my heart. But I think we're trying to build things that are useful and that do really good work, and where people don't see it as a terrible thing, it's a wonderful thing. And so I do think when you have the right kinds of boards and commissions where good work is happening and meaningful work is happening, but not down in the weeds work necessarily, that people, I'm not interested in that, and I'm not being screamed at, all of those things, environmental conditions could make it so they go that, or I don't want to run for office, hopefully we do recruit some people that want to do that work, but that isn't necessarily, you're not signing up to get in that path. That isn't what most people do. So don't worry if that's your expectation.
And I will say, we're not actively doing this now, which is why we're including this and consider it a part of, high-functioning boards. Not that we're not recruiting, but, I mean, we don't have an outlined process that says we have a duty to actively recruit members and to have a solicitation period and to really do that. The mayor makes appointments and the commission votes on those.
So in terms of recruitment, what does everybody think about a 4-year term? To me, that sounds a little long. But maybe that's just because I was up till 3 a.m. at my last board meeting.
Yeah, about that.
So that's not a way to recruit.
No.
Although I did advertise during the meeting. I did say applications are open.
We are 3 now. I know at the last meeting, there was conversation about having people, there was value in having folks serve longer. But we can certainly change that to 3, but that's, and there were some other cities that did it. So that's the only reason we included it there, just to have that conversation.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if we're trying to get more and more people involved, I mean, how much time do people really have to give? But at the same time, you don't want people to just learn how to do it and then cycle off. So I really don't know what's a good balance.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this survey that Sherry provided with this, we've got, the highest, the Aviation Advisory Board is clocking in at 4.6 years per member. And then it seems like it's pretty much what in the high 3s, low 4s is kind of where it's going to average out, right? And so these members who've been nominated by the mayor, approved by the city commission, on average are serving 1 1/3 terms. under our current structure. I don't know why we're getting to that third part and we're losing them, but, you know, if dialing them in for 4 years keeps them a little longer, then maybe that's good, because I've been so impressed with the people that I've served with. There's commitment, they develop institutional knowledge over time that really, I think, comes side by side with staff, where, you know, staff has knowledge, but they have knowledge too, because they've been on their board or commission or whatever for 4, 5, 6 years. Well, why not 8 years? You know what I mean? It's like, if they're rocking and rolling, why not let them go, you know?
DLB Smith, I do feel like to a certain extent, the average term length is interesting, but I do think, to your point, like there might be a little bit of self-selection, because some folks, if you ask them, would you like to serve on this board for 3 or 4 years, that might be an automatic no for them, just the perception of that. So I think the board service might attract people who are already stable and willing to potentially do it for years. Somebody who doesn't even know if they're going to live in Lawrence 2 years from now might automatically say, oh, well, I don't know if I'm going to be here in 4 years, so I'm out. And I know personally from volunteer recruitment that if you ask somebody, hey, do you want to volunteer twice a week for the next 8 weeks, people will generally say no. But if you can get them to come and do it one time, 5 years later, they're still there somehow. And so I think that as far as a sell, convincing somebody to serve on a board a few hours, or maybe more than a few hours every month, is in itself a little bit of an ask. And then the prospect of 4 years might be a little bit scary to some people. I feel like there's probably some folks, maybe some younger folks, where 4 years is like a significant portion of their life. And so that could be a big ask. So that is tricky. I don't think we should reduce it down to a la carte month by month, but I do think that it's probably a little bit of a hurdle as far as recruitment.
Well, I wonder if there's an argument to be made for not having it a standard for every board and commission is 4 years. Maybe there are certain commissions and boards that have a lot of knowledge building, where it takes a really long time to sort of come up to speed and feel comfortable and on a roll, as you said. Where other committees and boards, maybe the learning curve isn't so steep, and those could be shorter.
Could we say as necessary or as applicable to the boards not to exceed 4 years of a term?
Or you could make it a standard 2-year term with the ability to be reappointed, you know, 3 or 4 times. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice it, because you're right. You know, like some people might be scared off by 4 years. I wouldn't be. You know, I'd be like, that's just about right.
Yeah.
And the reality is,
But especially with the younger people that you mentioned, what young person in their 20s is going to be able to?
Yeah, right, exactly. True.
and the reality with this practically is it's just a limit. If somebody joins the Cultural Arts Commission and then a month later finds out that they got a job offer in Hawaii and is moving,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't tell them they can't leave. There's not.
Yeah, that's right.
Dry.
Yeah, it's not a gulag, right?
Yeah, I can beg, but so yeah, I mean, functionally, whether it's 4-year limits or 3-year limits, or whether it's a maximum of 3 and have some sort of automatic renewal, I don't know. I mean, this is maybe we're too in the weeds, but I think it's worth look when we do go to standardize all this stuff. I think it's worth looking at.
But it sounds like it could go multiple ways, and maybe it doesn't need to be standardized.
Yeah, I mean, I'll offer, it isn't your experience here, I will offer that we probably will see a stabilization of, there'll be potentially, if it passes, the mayor will be a 4-year term. This is a rotating thing that happens, so it may be that you'll see some stabilization of people's terms that way too. So this is, I'm just saying that also there's some thought that you'll have the more stabilized commission will continue a direction for a longer period of time, and therefore may work to convince some of the people that they appoint to help them do that work longer. Okay, that sounds political, and it is, but I mean, that actually happens other places, and they say, you know, this mayor recruited me and I'm here until she's gone, or things like that. So you may see some effects of that with these changes, adjustments in government.
Okay.
In the recruitment, would there be any, I know we say traditionally underserved, would it, I was thinking to our strategic plan where we specifically state that one of our commitments is to equity inclusion. Is it, from the communications perspective, is it better to speak to our, say, with recruitment of members with keeping in mind the strategic plan, the city's strategic plan of equity inclusion, as opposed to maybe traditionally been underserved in city government? I would defer to a communications individual more than an accountant on how to write something.
It's good language discipline.
Yeah.
And then secondly, in the recruitment, maybe this is too far in the weeds. What everybody was saying about recruitment, I completely agree with. But I do think that might be as an operational advisory board on how to actually implement that recruitment would be important. But instead of, is there some value to us defining what active solicitation period is at this level? At a minimum, what active solicitation period is, because this feels very broad, and what would that actually look like? That's just two things I had on recruitment.
DLB Smith, I mean, for me, I feel like there's two ways to think about the roles that are being recruited for. You know, on the Cultural Arts Commission, we might have one empty vacant role, but if you think about the city's entire board and commission, all 150 individuals, I think all of those roles they're serving as a volunteer leadership role. To me, I would get rid of the word period there entirely and just have a 365, nonstop education, awareness, and recruitment process, not for this specific role on the Cultural Arts Commission, but just for that level
general,
of engagement,
yeah.
that level of volunteer leadership, just trying to keep people engaged and keep people aware. And not everybody walking down the sidewalk will be aware that these positions exist and that they could fill them, but more than what it is currently. I think just keeping that level of awareness constant. And also, I mean, honestly, my position, communications, it's easier to just constantly be doing that work than to every time a position opens up, start doing the solicitation advertisement work. If you just have it as a blanket, nonstop priority, I feel like it's simultaneously it is more work, but in one way it's a little bit easier not having to restart that engine every time you feel like you need to specifically fill a position on a board or so.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, if you're actively soliciting every time you have one of these meetings, public meetings, saying, hey, isn't this great? You want to be involved? I mean, that is just, like you said, all the time.
Or isn't this terrible? You want to be?
I think what I was thinking about with the period is what you were speaking to, like having the booth, having a point where people can come to and not feel intimidated. Maybe they're not all watching these board meetings, and that type of active solicitation isn't going to do it. But maybe we don't need to define it here. Maybe that's an operational thing of how we're holding ourselves accountable of what does that look like? What does an active solicitation plan look like? And maybe that does have 3 events a year where we have a booth at the farmer's market and we're talking about what is public participation look like on these advisory boards. But I agree. I think if that was what it was, I would be good with having a period being removed. But if period holds us accountable to actually sitting down and doing something like that puts it at a level where people are comfortable, then I'd be inclined to leave period as is, just so we have to do something like that. But I would tend to agree with Dan on this point.
Do you have any thoughts on what active solicitation would look like besides
Hannah Ballard.
booths and,
Yeah.
I don't know what else.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of outreach strategies, right, that we can employ. We have a communications team, and we have communication folks in departments. They're not currently staffed with that work, so there is a capacity question of where this time to do this outreach around recruitment for boards and commissions comes from. So just to acknowledge, yeah, Daniela does more work this time, sorry. So there's a question there, but if there was capacity, we know how to do that work. It's really a capacity question, though.
Would it be something to where that's a responsibility of the board of participation, whatever board you're on, that you actively are part, instead of staff being the ones that are sitting at the booth, having the conversations, it's the board members that have to participate in these quarterly, meet and greets,
DLB Smith, I mean, I think that is definitely a valid idea. If the city was going to have a booth at the farmer's market, and you could, I mean, somebody like myself, I'd be happy to be there and talk about what serving on the Cultural Arts Commission has been like, and encouraging people, trying to like lower that barrier to entry so people understand that it could be you. It doesn't, So I think that would certainly be a way of maybe mitigating some of the added staff.
I wouldn't make membership contingent upon that. I would simply just encourage staff, hey, invite them. Because there's some people that would be more than happy to go over to the farmers market and just be available. Just say, yeah, I've served on 3 boards or commissions, and clearly I keep coming back. I'm not getting paid, so there must be something there that is satisfying, and about working for the community like that. I'd be happy to do that, and I think there's some people that would, but then there's other people, Sherry was talking about, that they might not have the time or the bandwidth, for that kind of thing, and so don't penalize them, but definitely staff can, as long as there's only one person from the BZA or the Park and Rec Board there's not going to be a quorum issue, so it's like there's no issues there. I think it could work.
So takeout period?
I think active solicitation sounds pretty good. I mean, that can be any number of things that we've talked about.
There's something about constant communication. It's like, I only call you when I need you, But constant communication is like the city is here for you if you just can come and ask, And that's what constant communication means to me, is like someone would know the city is here for them to help them if they have an issue, or help them grow with their kids into different activities, but not just coming at them when the city wants something. And just anecdotally, once I did a survey, like, do you look at the insert of your water bill? Nobody I know looks at that insert. So don't put it in the insert of the water bill, because not very many people actually read that.
I do.
I know you do, but you're at this table. I do too. I want to know when the compost opens.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people down at my level read
It's
it.
usually, trash wasn't picked up, and I go back and I'm like, oh yeah, they told me trash is tomorrow.
I think sometimes the husband opens the bills
Yeah,
and sees, so the wife never sees them and the kids never see them, even if they're reading age,
Yeah.
So, hey, this is yours, you get to pay it,
Yeah. So can we move through a little bit more of this at this point, in terms of looking through and hoping it informs our larger discussion of what fits where? So vacancies, any comments on vacancies right now? I mean, pretty straightforward. The appointing authority would then fill a vacancy if somebody had to leave. So one question would be, though, the fails to attend 50% of the scheduled meetings in a fiscal year. And that sort of, I highlight that one because we've all read the staff response and the member response. And I remember, I think I have at least an organic feeling that sometimes that's a problem with attendance. We've all probably experienced that. So what does 50% sound like? I mean, would you be comfortable serving with people who missed half the meetings.
Does attendance
Yes,
by
ma'am.
Zoom count?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, then you could almost attend almost all meetings, because if they're in the evening.
But, I mean, how much does that detract from the duties of the board when people are absent? I mean, I don't know how many meetings have been missed because of lack of quorum. I don't know if that's a problem, or if it's just the work of the body doesn't have the membership, it doesn't have the opinions that you're after. If you've got people not following through meeting to meeting. You know, I'll posit, I think that sounds a little low, but
Gabby Smith, yeah, I agree. 50% does seem pretty low, and from my experience, I don't know. I have never experienced somebody who misses 50% of their meetings. I feel like usually people are either on the 95% or the 0%. It's like those are really the two. But I do know that there have been boards and commissions that have struggled with attendance and not being able to reach quorum, and
Yeah.
it's a very real issue. I also know that, I mean, for us, if somebody fails to attend a set percentage of their meetings, it's Cultural Arts Commission, they aren't off the commission. They are just, there is an opportunity to review their status on the board.
Yeah, that's how it's set up right now, isn't
Yeah.
it?
I think that the percentage listed in the procedures can kind of help to, it's kind of like the term limits, whether that's an expectation of term or a limit of term. I feel like the percentage listed might inform what people feel like is expected of them, and if 50% is the point at which they're in jeopardy of being removed from the body, it might be setting the expectation a little bit too low. Because honestly, if somebody was missing 60% of the Cultural Arts Commission meetings, I would be very concerned about that. So, when we're drafting our dream document, I would be in favor of setting the bar a little bit higher.
I mean, I think even with the special alcohol tax, that 50% would have been there was 4 meetings for the year, and one was to review
Yes.
applications, and, you know, like, if you missed 2 of those meetings at the right time, then you kind of miss the meat of the substance of that board or that committee. So, yeah, I think 50% is pretty high. I would hope that we had that expectation. I would be even inclined, and have attorneys in the room here, more than a certain percentage, like more than 30%.
I don't know what the legal
40%,
language would look
whatever
like,
that
but
would look like.
I just think people should attend more meetings.
But in generally, are you all interested in having that be a higher percentage? Because we can look at how to write that.
It probably should be higher. It's not anything I've ever
I
thought
think-
about. I mean, I have, but I haven't. You know, it hasn't created a huge problem. I think in all the time, all the stuff I've been on, I think there's been a couple of meetings that couldn't proceed because of quorum. So in, I don't know, like 8 years of involvement or something, I've seen it happen twice. So it doesn't happen a ton. And when these folks do come back, I'm happy to have them back. It's never been anybody that I was glad was gone, you know? I don't know. It's so, that's why it's not, but I agree. It's like if you've signed up, you probably need to be accountable and you need to show up. And, but I think, I do like that your membership can be reviewed. You're not just
Yeah.
instantly booted.
Right.
But now we affirmatively reach out, hey, what's going on? Can you come back? Do you want to come back? Is there anything we need to know?
And can we say unplanned scheduled meetings? Because something like this, where we had people just happen to, timing doesn't
Yeah.
work out, but overall, the participation of that individual is correct, is appropriate at the level that we want, that maybe it doesn't.
Yeah.
There's a difference between
Yeah.
excused and
Yeah.
unexcused absences
Yeah.
for our kids
Yeah,
in school.
Yeah, that's a good point. We talk about this sort of thing monthly at my day job, and unplanned is the language we certainly use in our bylaws and whatnot, so, but it's
Uncommunicated?
Well, yeah, I mean.
I'm sure
no
the
call, no
lawyers can.
show is, that's a whole nother.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
regardless of the reason, I mean, if a person isn't there a substantial amount of time, even if it's for a good reason,
Right.
I mean, the board suffers.
Yeah,
So, I mean, if a person can't attend 50% of the scheduled meetings, you're probably actually making it easy for them to get off the board by,
yeah, I mean,
by having a requirement. They might not say, I don't want to serve anymore. If this is like, okay, I don't know.
yeah.
I think staff and legalese could come up with whatever the proper language is.
Yeah.
To
Greater than
decide,
30% of the meetings, is that consensus? Greater than 30%?
DLB Smith, I've got nothing against greater than 30 or less than 70, whichever. So you're saying the expectation is that they attend 70% or more?
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
saying position is considered vacated if they fail to attend.
Yeah.
And that's why, I would say.
Right, under vacancies, it's, if you do not attend, if we change it to 70% of the meetings, the position is considered vacated.
Right.
Yeah, that's the eject button there. There's no review.
Right.
You're done.
I'd be in favor of getting the review, and as far as I know right now, folks can also ask to take a leave from serving on the board, which I can't remember how many meetings it is, but there is a set number, which has been explained to me at some point, that they can request to take a leave, at which point they can rejoin without having to be reappointed. I don't know what
Yeah, I agree with the review. To the 70%, just play that out theoretically. If we're getting to 70%, we're now, if it's a monthly, we're now in October by the time we finally said, this isn't working. We need to find someone else.
30% missed. We're not going to let it
Okay,
be
I
70.
heard 70. So
Oh.
No.
Okay.
No.
70% attended.
70%
70%
attendance.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we're doing the positive side.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm good with positive side.
You get alarmed there.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I think retaining the review language, but changing it to 70.
Yeah.
Percent attendance, yeah.
So
Review at 70, you review when it drops below 70%. I would be, I hate to just kick people off because just, I don't know.
I'm sure we'll have another iteration.
We will.
Some
Right,
details.
Maybe functionally, to get to that point, I think still struggle, but the consensus is yes, that would be what we'd have.
Okay.
in.
It could be 70% eject, 50% you get a conversation, something like that.
By whom?
Yeah.
I
There is
think
a
that's,
biome.
that actually happens, and so I like this, not having a review, not having an uncomfortable conversation.
You just
by-
want that bright line.
Well, I mean, I just say, I think my bosses probably would enjoy something that is a little
See.
harder line.
Right. I think if they've missed
There
the,
you go.
if there's 12 meetings in the year and they've missed the first 4, they can't get to 70%. And we don't need to wait any longer at that point, right?
Right.
Because we would then need to outline who does the review,
That's
what's the
true.
criteria.
Yeah, that's
Right.
true.
What's the standard,
Yeah.
and it's high
And the review
functioning
could be
boards
reappointment.
Trying to get to, yeah.
Like,
Apply for reappointment.
yeah, you applied, you created a vacancy, you reapplied and said, sorry, put me back on, I'll never miss again, and they do it.
All right, so staff wants a bright line.
We
Give them
could
the
we
bright
could-
line.
We could do both. We could do, and I understand that the 70% review, the question of who would review, maybe not review, but I mean, for me, again, speak for myself, the Cultural Arts Commission, if somebody hits that, goes below 70% attendance, I would love to have something that tells me. I would love to have a little alarm go off so that I can be aware if somebody is struggling or, and so, I mean, there is a list in here of board chair or presiding officer duties. And I mean, for me, I'm more than happy to shoot an email to somebody checking in making sure that serving on the board still works with their schedule and commitments. So having that higher threshold of 70% for maybe just like a little alarm bell, and then we could retain the 50%, like it's clearly not working out, for the sake of making it easier for the city staff to vacate those positions and not have a review every time. So I do agree that if somebody misses over 50% of their meetings, at that point going through a review seems a little bit like a waste of time.
I think I would be in favor of leaving it as it's an objector, and then one of the responsibilities of the board chair is to pay attention to or be held accountable for the attendance numbers. And so if someone has now missed the first 2 meetings, it's your responsibility to tell them, hey, you miss another one, we don't need a review, you miss another one, you're out, you failed to maintain the responsibilities of this committee, and you'll have to reapply if you want to continue to serve on this board.
I put a bullet point adding to duties of board chair or presiding officer, address member attendance issues. That would be a duty.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That
I
way
think
it can happen
it gets
anywhere along.
both.
Yeah.
It's not a formal review, but there is a responsibility to have that conversation if someone is not going to meet those.
And it's purposefully vague, because I was chair of BCA, so what if I don't call that person? Am I supposed to call him? Well, as it's written right now, I don't have to, but what if I don't?
Yeah.
So now that
Sure.
they have recourse, well, Travis never called me, so you can't kick me off.
Yeah.
So it's just, I think just address membership issues is get you where you want to go, Like the staff liaison will call me or email me, we'll talk about it, and we'll decide, let's send them an email, let's call them, or not. We're just aware that they're missing a lot of meetings and they're going to get booted if they miss 1 or 2 more. So I think there's a spectrum there, and that's appropriate.
You feel like that works?
I think that's great. Obviously, having to have the staff liaison potentially. How aware on average is a staff liaison of
They're aware.
Attendance? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think it would be nice to have a little byline or something just so that my staff liaison will let me know, like, this person's below 70. Just to make it easy. They don't have to think all the time. Just there's a number that sets off the alarm bell. But nothing specific, I think.
That's a bullet I added, is just to
Okay.
keep the chair informed of
Yep,
attendance.
just advise the chair. There you go.
So I would like to move on as we go, because so review of applicants. Anything to discuss there? So it's a mayor and city commission for policy boards, city manager designee for advisory boards, or for, actually, I guess what we're thinking of is operational bodies.
That's my only note.
Yeah,
is that
operational bodies.
Got it.
And then review criteria.
That's good enough.
Is that pretty broad enough to attract conflicts of interest, compliance with norms of conduct, including but not limited to decorum communications, concept of acting as a body with one voice? So they're pretty broad. Any other review criteria that people can think of or would like to consider?
Well, you're reviewing the applicants, so they're not yet board members.
Right.
Right.
So how are you going to review, how can the criteria include compliance with norms of conduct? I mean,
What
they're
if
not
somebody's out, what if they're running a Facebook page where, they,
Oh, I see. That's not norms of conduct in the meeting.
yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
yeah, because they're not in the meeting.
Yeah, somebody who's come before the commission and cursed them out.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone who's,
Yeah.
habitually
Mhm.
disruptive in commission meetings and
Yeah.
something like that. And there's,
Well, what about though the concept of acting as a body with one voice?
I think this could say interview. I mean, I think generally the mayor I know and whomever would calls individuals who have applied and kind of has an informal interview with them. So I think that's what some of this is getting to is.
Known cranks need not apply.
Yeah. And I think, if I understand, the concept of acting as a body with one voice is just someone who's willing to work with other people. Is kind of what that's saying, is work to get to a decision.
B. Smith, I personally have never heard of or had any problem with the way that people are appointed. And for me, that means either it's smooth and perfect, or it means that it's not substantial enough, that it's just a rubber stamp. So I'm curious if other people have more experience with that, especially, I mean, you mentioned like the interview review process. I'm curious to hear a little more about that, or if anybody has anecdotal experience with having the mayor call you up in the middle of the night and grill you on your personal convictions.
I mean, I think we talked about this at the last meeting or the meeting before, that a lot of those nominations come through that personal interaction and your participation in the community or other boards. So I think, while in none of them I've had this, I've had a lot of interactions with the people that have nominated me prior to this, and probably fleshed out a lot of this stuff. Maybe I haven't found my weird Facebook pages because I can't access them anymore. But I think it's happening, but probably just not in that formal sense. At least that's kind of my interpretation of it.
I think that's practically what's happening in many, many situations, yeah.
So are we good with that?
Yes.
Okay. Communications for policy boards. Direction from the city commission. Recommendations to the city commission. Communication with staff for liaison. And do not have authority to direct commission or staff to act. And do not have an operational role in the work of the city, meaning not an employee. Is that okay? I think that fourth bullet point there, do not have authority to direct the commission or staff to act, that came up in the surveys a bit, in terms of some staff feeling that they were directed to do something, to come up with this ordinance or come up with that policy or do that thing. And so I think that's an important piece to either just have that as it is or flesh out that there really isn't. We don't, because some of the, as I understood from the surveys, there were some boards or commissions that because they didn't have direction, didn't know what their real role was. They were just coming up with stuff, and that often led to staff being told, well, present this or format this or, come up with the ordinance for.
Well, how does that
So-
conflict then? Excuse me, did I speak to?
No.
Okay, bullet number 2 is to make recommendations, but bullet number 4 says do not direct.
About require the commission or staff to act.
So should it be make recommendations as requested? Because if the board exists to advise on policy, then when they are requested to advise or direct, I mean, I think those words are a little synonymous, then they are requested to direct. I mean, that's their purpose.
I think the term usage of recommendation provides the commission the ability to accept that recommendation or disagree with the recommendation, and it not still be directing the commission.
Okay.
That would just be how I've always understood what our role as advisory boards are, is that we do the study, we make a recommendation, the city commission says, yeah, we agree with you, or we don't. And they either implement it, or they send it back, or ask staff to do some further detail on it.
There have been boards and commissions that have told the city commission, I want this on the next agenda.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
This must be on the next agenda,
Oh,
more than once.
oh,
So that's addressing that
I
to some
understand.
extent.
The only thing I have on here, I'm sorry, Sherry, were you? The received direction, assign and other specific direction from the commission may provide. And maybe this is too early in the process, but thinking further ahead of, as we're trying to establish standardized agendas, does the vagueness of the received direction from the city commission allow us to create specific agendas for each one of those commissions, or is this a little bit of whatever the city commission needs at that point in time we'll put on the agenda? Or am I misreading this a little bit too much?
Well, I'm not sure if this is relevant or not, but I think the Parks and Rec Board would have enjoyed a invitation from the city commission to address issues of admission fees. Do this for us, you know.
But again, if we're standardizing agendas, is there just going to be one agenda item that says directions from city commission? And then what are those agenda items underneath that?
I guess I'm not sure
Well-
what you're thinking, because I was thinking more along the lines of, yeah, being asked to review and give recommendations on a particular issue. So I'm not sure what do you mean by the standardized
Well, if,
agenda? And
if the planning commission has a very set, like what their responsibilities are. So their agendas are very standardized. Let's just say like the sales tax audit committee, we know that we're supposed to review those things, but maybe a special alcohol tax doesn't have as standardized of an agenda as it currently stands. So what would an agenda look like if if we don't have a stated purpose for that, so that like we need to have that advisory board says this is our responsibilities as it relates to what we're advising and making recommendations on.
Well, you know, sometimes, I mean, for the department itself, I mean, like, the director may ask the board, I need some guidance here.
Right.
You know, we need to take this to the council, and we need some, I mean, that kind of thing. So it's almost like it's I think it's, in some cases, like the board is almost like a mini city commission,
Right.
right? It's sort of for the staff to test out, you know, in effect, we'll test it out with you guys. If it works with you guys, then we can go to the city manager. But if it doesn't work with you guys,
As we go back to the strategic plan as the founding inspiration for the work, all the work, really, and the work that staff is doing as well, and these are conversations I have with our executive team, where when you read this language, we have key performance indicators built underneath them. And what I say is we should be talking about, every staff meeting, we should be talking about what is moving these indicators. What's the next step that's going to be doing this? From a policy standpoint, there's a lot of policy that needs to go into making those numbers happen. Okay? It's not just budget allocation and staff work. There's also things that are the next thing. And we had a pretty good interaction, I think, with the Sustainability Advisory Board on this subject. So if they looked at what their commitment statement would be, say, what is it that's the next policy, the next change, the next initiative that would be most useful in going the direction that is spelled out in this as measured by the key performance indicators? And when I said, you have a lot of work to do. So, and I started listing just some random things, and I think that gave them some ideas of, so our job is to convene and talk about what are the next policy steps that push us along so that this commission can maybe continue that work or adopt that work and implement that work. So if that gives you some understanding, staff is trying to do that too on the operational side. I think there's a lot of policy work that happens across the board in each of these 5 outcome areas when you start to just look at it that way and you read the statement and say, oh yeah, an ordinance on this, and if we had recruited a new company to do this or whatever. I mean, I think there's a lot of creativity that goes into that.
And I think that's kind of what I'm kind of getting to. Like, if there is an established that the board that we've created, responsibility is the implementation of policy and procedures related to unmistakable identity. Like, that's that board's responsibility. That's number one. Like, we're ensuring that the oversight of those are happening. We've got the policies necessary to implement them. And obviously there is a mini board that we have to, the city commission is going to say, hey, we need to further examine this as a policy. And yes, that does go to that particular board, but that standard, here's what our goal is, here's what our responsibility is this. And it's adherence to the strategic plan or implementation of the strategic plan, policies and procedures. And I think maybe that's where I'm stuck. If like that's an agenda item that is stuck on each one of these boards' agenda. Number one, we know every time we come to that meeting, that's what we're supposed to be doing and how we're actually operating as a board.
So is that something to add to this communications?
Possibly. Yeah, that's what I feel like I'm trying to get to from that very first one. I do think that is, we should receive direction from the city commission on an as-needed basis, but maybe there's another policy communication board that is what our number one responsibility is. And maybe this isn't the right place for it, and I'm just misreading what we're trying to accomplish with this particular line.
Yeah, I mean, reacting to that, I'm wondering if some annual device of the annual work plan, or these are the initiatives that we will be working on. Some are very responsive. So,
Yeah.
Planning Commission, what's going to come at us? But the ones that have proactive work, I think that would be a reasonable thing to either probably initiate with the board and commission and the staff liaison work, and that these are the things that we've talked about doing to further the strategic plan, send it up to the city commission for their response or reaction. In some cases, we have had joint meetings, and if we get this down to a smaller number, it's not outrageous at all to think that you might have joint meetings on an annual basis to do that work on a rolling basis. Right now, we give the planning, the city commission receives updates on the strategic plan outcome areas. That could be a good time to also invite the members for a joint meeting in that participation. Hard to do with 20-some, but
Right.
easier to do if we get down to these.
Yeah. There's also opportunities, I imagine, because I know the planning commission meets with staff, and we actually jointly go through, like, what might be some of our priorities this year, what needs to be tackled.
You do.
And that works out really well, because it's a joint sort of discussion of what will be the priorities for this year that we'll deal with on a larger issue,
So we could lift that technique and put it into this document.
Okay. So how does that differ from operational boards? If we look at the operational boards in terms of its communications. Is there any significant differences that we need to establish? We already decided that the technical advisors wasn't needed.
Are we taking out technical advisors in total, or just the term technical?
Oh, maybe just the term technical. Is Is there any reason that, why we don't have, do not speak on behalf of the city or board in terms of the policy board? For operational board, you have here, do not speak on behalf of the city or board except as approved by the board or city manager. Would there be a similar restriction under policy boards?
We should probably.
Probably
I think that's
should.
oversight, yeah.
Yeah.
I have that on both.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Should that be and/or was a clarifying question I had. So it's do not speak on behalf of the city or board except as approved by the board and/or city manager. So the board could approve the board to speak on the city's behalf?
And again, some of these are.
It seems a little tricky.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just saying, if they all agree on something, then it is the thought of the advisory board, so.
Okay. Anything else under communications?
I asked a question, and I'll just bring it up transparently. What about subject to open meetings? So I didn't visualize this to be that way because of the informality and the, somebody used a term, agility.
Yeah, lowering barriers to access.
Lowering barriers. They might meet during the day, with staff. They might be in operations. The formalities of open meetings with it being recorded and minutes, and I leave that open, not just so it's touched on, and you all can kind of give opinions on that.
We talked about that at the end of the last meeting. I mean, Tony's going to have the final say, but I mean, at first glance, I don't think that it triggers Coma or Cora.
It doesn't.
No, so, I mean, so really, it's just a matter, you're asking, does it look sub rosa for us, for staff to be meeting with this picked group of people, looking for ideas, expertise, and insight? No, I don't think so, but then there's other people that, really enjoy reading conspiracy and things. But, no, it's just staff trying to be diligent and connect with the community and seek insight, ideas, and, I mean, I think it's extremely defensible. They have no policy-making power. They have no ability to speak for the city. Anything staff does has got to be approved by the electeds at some point. I mean, so it seems like there's so many. Yeah, so it's not some like star chamber or something like that that's doing something,
D.L.B. Smith, my inclination would be to not have it be open, but then potentially keep some record. I mean, you mentioned you wouldn't have to have minutes, but I think it could be beneficial for both staff to be able to refer to the input that's received, and also just to maintain the public awareness that there is a level of transparency there, that this information is being recorded in some way, and if people did really want to access it, that it exists. But I do think that having Kurt's awesome camera setup and everything and broadcasting on YouTube is definitely going to scare away a decent percentage of people. I'm often taking pictures and videos of people in my day-to-day job, and I know that roughly 99% of people do not want me to take their photograph. and even less people want to be on YouTube or any sort of broadcast medium. So I think that not having it be open, not having it be recorded specifically, and not having it be broadcast is going to really increase how comfortable most people in the community feel with actually participating, but keeping some sort of record just for posterity.
Yeah, we're all subject to Cora,
Yeah.
just not, developing the open meetings and abiding by those.
Right.
It makes it very difficult to meet, too, as I understand. Finding a place that can handle the technology is just really burdensome on staff, so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I don't know what to do with the rules of procedure thing. I didn't look at that. Didn't have time to go over that.
It's just a link to the current ones that are for the city commission, and so
Uh-huh.
we would need to update those, and some of this would be in that. Just to let you know, we already do have one in place that applies to advisory boards, and so
Okay.
I mean, we can go over it, but it's.
That could be future meeting
Yeah.
work.
Okay.
Yeah, after this work, then we'll see if there are any changes that are forced into that and bring that back.
Okay. Training. I know we've all talked about, wouldn't it be great if every commissioner had some onboarding to know what the role was and what the rules were. So anything else that might be added to this or changed in this training list?
Who's doing this review for all board members?
Are you talking about the biennial review?
Yeah.
So in the past, we've sort of done it as a team. I mean, right now, as a member comes on, staff liaisons do that. But years ago, my understanding is they used to have sort of an annual meeting of all volunteers and kind of go over stuff. I think that's probably too soon, but if we did one every other year, it would really, I mean, that's kind of, it would be all boards at one time, and it would just be a refresher on these things, and you'd be welcome to come. I mean, that's how I envision it, but it could be whatever, I mean, it would really be at Craig's discretion to decide how we do that.
I get that. I was misreading that. That makes
Because
sense.
this is sort of, the code this is what we're thinking of having the commission adopt as code that says we must train individuals and outlines that expectation. But the actual administration of how exactly we do that would be, it would kind of be a refresher. If you've been in a few years, or new people are in, we'd do that refresher, aside from kind of that initial, here's everything you need to know, and then you've never been on a board. It's a lot to take in, but every other year you get a refresher on all those basic things. That's how I envision it, but again, it would really be,
Yeah,
we would develop
I've
it
done
as a
it where
team.
it is an annual thing, where I've done it where we've recorded it and then required everybody to certify that they've gone through it again. So some combination of that. We will, what's clear is we're not doing this very well, and we need to do it much more thoroughly and regularly, so.
One question I have, when you say not completing the required training will forfeit position, depending on what the training is, I'm just thinking, Planning Commission has an orientation every year, but not everybody can make that.
Yeah,
So what does that mean for a
That's why I'm
commissioner who would not be able to make that orientation?
Yeah, that's why I'm suggesting, where I have been in a city where they did require that, and the elected body was very adamant, and we had to make accommodations. We did record it in some cases where they could, but everybody was expected
To
be
watch
there.
that orientation, okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to make a suggestion here on the bullet points. Members must participate in, I'd like to add relationship between the board, the city commission, and the staff. I think board members need to understand what those relationships look like on that particular board that they're.
Given that what we've seen in the questionnaires, that's a great addition.
Relationship and roles, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other suggestions? How about duties of the board chair or presiding officer? We did add, what did we call it? Attendance issues. Anything else?
Yes. Communication with the department head, or, I mean, if there's I'm thinking my own relationship with Parks and Rec. So the presiding officer, the duties is to maintain communication and relationship with the department head.
And the staff liaison?
Assuming the staff liaison is the department head.
It likely will be, yeah.
Yeah.
So the language say staff liaison?
Okay, if that's the case.
There may be cases where the champion, for instance, is not a department director. That is the way it is now, but I could imagine that it might not be.
Okay, how about duties for board members? Attendance, participate, rules and procedures. Seems fairly straightforward.
I wonder, do board members also benefit from the same training on roles and responsibilities between city commission, staff, et cetera? Is that what we were suggesting earlier?
That's
Under
included
training.
in this training.
Oh, that's in training, not duties, I apologize. Got it.
Yeah, and I think when we say that they'll receive training on procedures, requirements, and expectations, roles and responsibilities is part of the expectations outlined in the forming document for each of these boards.
Staff liaison duties.
I added
Yes.
keep chair advised of member attendance.
Yep.
Okay, and then the final section, well, no, norms. And a lot of this would help with the rules and the training. A lot of this would come under training, would be handled with training.
Could I go back real quick on these, on the staff liaison and the chair? I just want, Tony's not here, she could speak to this, but we are trying to be more prepared and formalized on if there is disruption of meetings, how is that handled? So formally, the city manager can trespass somebody from city property. We've extended that obviously to the board, the city commissioner, but we want to be very explicit about that and prepare. So it will likely be the staff liaison would have that same extended authority, and we would document that. But we feel like that formality and understanding by the board chair, and we'll go through that with training, so meeting procedures and how you do that. But hopefully it doesn't come up very often, but we thought that it's really not something that's been addressed. So I mentioned that here, and that's something we'll probably document here as well.
I see in a lot of this, the only time when conflict of interest is addressed is at the very first appointment. And naturally, I think a person joins a board in which they have an interest. And sometimes then that can become a professional interest, whether it's a side, business, and, maybe you do something with clay and you're going to want to be on that board and direct it your way. Or maybe you're some kind of environmental person with a side gig and you're on the board now. I think that if you only get your conflict of interest addressed once every 4 years when you are appointed, I think somewhere in here there should be a mandatory thing that a person has to say if their circumstances change. And they have an interest, a money-making interest in something that pertains to the board upon which they serve.
So an annual disclosure form or something like
Yeah.
that they say, I do not have a conflict of interest, or I will recuse myself in those. I think that's in our ethics policy, but to say that they have to maintain current status and conflict of interest or something.
We just, on the
Universities have to
Watkins
do that.
board, we just, we had the conflict of interest thing we had to sign, and somebody said, even if you signed it when you started, we need to sign it every year.
We just have an online form, we check a box saying,
Oh.
yeah.
But we
So it could be
actually,
something
had
else.
to do it in
The
person.
planning commission.
No, my employer.
Okay.
is in that.
But it was annual.
Yes, and,
I'm aware
He
not-for-profit
doesn't-
boards, I know, on all those, they always required that too. Corporate boards too.
Circumstances can change, is partly what you're saying.
Yes, that's what I'm saying,
Beyond just
yeah.
the beginning, right?
Uh-huh.
So as part of are you proposing maybe part of the board chair's responsibilities to ensure conflict of interest
Right.
hasn't changed from meeting to meeting?
Or
or
6
is it-
months to see, or,
Year, annual?
yeah,
Work
I don't know, something. My son just
Yeah.
told me that his law firm lost $62 million because of a conflict of interest that wasn't disclosed.
Right,
And that also gets to transparency issues, and trust. Yeah.
right.
We will address that. I think it's in our ethics policy, but to do something affirmative and an annual basis, we can figure that out.
I've got a note for that.
Good point.
So anything else on, I'm going to move us along here. Norms, I mean, we can all, of course, look over this more time and address them, go back and touch base for next meeting if there's something we think we've missed.
I wanted to ask about, should not unilaterally offer testimony on state or federal legislative matters or rulemaking processes, et cetera. So, I think we could just clarify, like, about what? Because, like, I was over at the legislature, like, last summer. You know, uh-oh, I'm not supposed to be here. They're gonna kick me off my board.
Object.
That was one of the ones Tony had sent, Craig.
Is it on behalf of
I
the
think we
city?
can
on
be more
behalf of
specific that it's.
Whatever your
As opposed to just.
board-related activity is, yeah.
Should not unilaterally represent the city.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And like I said, I think if we take these home and if we have something we want to come back to, we can do that next meeting too, if we haven't had time to.
Is the last sentence in that part that Travis has brought up, because that feels like, is that another bullet point, or is that really related to?
City support proposed measures.
What I
we
think
said in
it's
the
doing
previous-
is saying, you, just because you're on a board or commission, you can't go to Topeka and go testify and say, the city of Lawrence opposes this bill.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the Parks and
Yeah,
Recs.
I am a member and I'm.
Let me tell you.
Yes. Now, it is likely that, so we have our own legislative priorities list. It is likely that we may say, hey, you know who'd be great to speak on that? And bring a board and commission member if they're available, or we know that they're in the Capitol, for instance. And could you speak on the city's position that's already adopted and approved? That's that second sentence, I think.
Okay, so, Sherry, I was going to say, given the time and that we still have this whole establishment, which
And-
really gets into a lot of meaty things.
Yeah, and I would say that's really the main thing about establishment, is me just starting to outline some of, how we would, codify this ordinance, resolutions, that it applies to subcommittees. I don't think there's a lot necessarily that you all would, you can comment on. The main thing, I think, was just what Craig already discussed, that how operational advisory boards would function, and those would not be in open meetings. There'd be transparency, but, remain flexible to departments. The policy boards, I kind of went over earlier, how those would be done through codified, what it would lay out, that there could be subcommittees. It's more just that it must be done by ordinance. The commission needs to take official action to change a policy board once set, those types of things. We can talk about it at the next meeting. I don't know that there's again, it's more sort of the technical, how would this happen, than the other pieces.
So I was going to suggest, just taking this home, rereading this particular document. We'll start with it at the next meeting maybe and see, do we want to go back and touch base on something that we saw when we had more time to look at it, look through the establishment? So that would be the first agenda item, is to come back to this document and make sure we've got, but leading on from there, yes.
Maybe
Danny.
Smith, before we move on, just because I'll forget if I don't mention it now, I think one thing that we had brought up last time with a question mark, sort of, was coma and Cora in relation to subcommittee meetings. And so that's something, I don't know if we need to hammer it out now, but I think it's something that I'd like to see specifically spelled out here. I do personally I would prefer if it didn't, because it would be a lot more work. But
I
but
do
yeah.
have that laid out, so
It-
if you want to review it, we can talk about it next
Okay.
meeting.
Yeah,
Great, yeah, we can put it on the agenda for next.
yeah. That'd be great. So that would be the first part of the next meeting, but I'm wondering if we're ready, given our policy discussion, higher level policy versus organizational body discussion, if we're ready to start sort of tackling in one way or another, looking at where our existing boards and commissions might lie. Would they fit better if they were reorganized or in some fashion? If they were combined in some fashion, would they fit under some? Just sort of play around with this list that we have, and, you know, do that on our own too for homework and bring our suggestions. And if we could have that the planning meeting or something with the whiteboards, we might be able to just start at least initially making some lists.
Well, you're talking about this list?
Yes.
It would really help me if there was a couple of sentences on what each one does.
Okay.
Isn't
And I
there a
think lot of
document for
is-
that?
Yeah, I think there's a
Yeah.
lot that's already in this advisory board and commission's alignment with strategic plan document, right?
Well, that is the sort of vision state, well, not vision statement, but that's the statement for each of the outcomes and commitments. But if you're wanting to know, I mean, I can pull it from each board. Each board that we have on has its own page and kind of has what they're currently charged with.
Are they all on one place? When you go to the initial meetings, I mean, all the boards are listed on that initial website with their description.
Yeah.
I think you might have to
Oh,
open
is it
each one to
you?
find the description.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't know.
I could get that in order and send it.
Okay.
Thank you, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So pair that with this.
Okay.
And then start playing around with the
What do you
boards and
have?
commissions.
Which-
This one, this advisory boards, the second document, or one of the documents that Sherry gave us tonight.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
so
Yeah.
keep the statement about what sort of, what we say our outcomes are, you know, those statements.
Yeah.
And then add the general charge of each of the,
Yeah.
each of those that are listed.
And we can look back at the work that was done the first meeting with primary and secondary and where they all fit in. Does that sound like a plan going forward to start sort of putting these things in categories? Organizational, advisory? You're
I thought it
looking
was-
very skeptical, Travis.
At some point, I do want to, if you allow it, I do want to ask staff what they think about
What should be on
the
there.
activities of our current boards and whatnot, and I don't know when it would be useful for us to have that. I think that was what I was trying to sort in my head, is when would it be helpful for us, if you think it's okay to have them submit anonymous information about that? Or do we, or if you say, no, let's not get into that, then we won't, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can give you some feedback. I don't know about this the anonymous part of it.
I just don't want anybody to get any heat for what they say, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand. I mean, we're really categorizing it fairly objectively. You know,
Right.
what is this? What kind of work do they do? And I honestly, I think your opinions are as important as theirs, or more so, but I will, because remember, you're trying to build something that's useful for what the strategic plan's asking us to do for the future,
Right.
not the past. And so I think we can have a conversation. I'll probably work with the liaisons and the department directors, and I'll kind of broadly do it, and I can cleanse it from, I will anonymize
Yes.
the input, if you'll trust me to deliver that.
I think that would be really, because I thought we got really good answers, actionable answers out of that last polling that we did of staff.
Mhm.
And so I think this would be equally,
Okay.
and so, and if we had it by the time we met next time, then I think we've put all the pieces in place for us to really get into the meat of our work.
Okay.
Yeah, and I like that idea that you said, what kind of work do these committees do, and where does it fit in the strategic plan? If that's our framework for homework ahead of this meeting, that'll help us start categorizing or reshaping things. What kind of work do these committees do in relation to the strategic plan?
So you want their current charge?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So,
And then information that Craig's going to do a general polling for on sort of where staff feels these boards and their duties fall in terms of policy versus operational is what was discussed earlier. Is that right? Okay.
That's good.
yes. And so I'm sure that'll take more than one meeting, but we'll start tackling it next time. So, calendars.
Sherry, could I ask the Corvallis report that they finished up? I was able to
Yes.
pull the Bozeman one, but
Still can't get it open?
I
Okay.
just tried on my phone. Maybe I'm doing that.
I think that they've changed where all their stuff is, so the link that we had in the previous one is no longer valid, but I can certainly get all that because I had staff create a whole list for
Okay.
me with links that are working, so I'll get, just to go back through all of this for all of you. So yes, I'll send that out to you.
Thank you.
And that's it, just a link to all of the stuff that was in that initial report Craig did to Corvallis. Okay.
Yeah. And if we could try to get that planning staff meeting room with the whiteboards would be
Oh, yeah.
great.
That shouldn't be a problem.
So, next meeting. Being mindful of our tight timeline and the amount of time for Sherry to get that together, what we just discussed, and Craig to talk to the staff liaisons and department heads to get us that information before ahead of that meeting.
So what is the next bullet point on our timeline, our next? I know early on, we sort of came up with a little plan. I'm wondering where we are in relation to the next step.
Yeah, so according to that plan, in March, we would be doing a first draft of recommendations, so that in April, we could be ready to host a public meeting to solicit feedback on the first draft of recommendations. So we're doing actually pretty well, but just keeping in mind, at some point, a first draft of recommendations or something that you want to present to the public should be created.
Yeah, what we've been
so-
giving you, Sherry's been doing this, is bullet point level. So
Right.
we probably need to start leaning into the drafting mode. And we work as a team, sharing the drafts and marking them up, and Tony also participates. So, again, I'm being transparent. We're offering language about what we heard, and hopefully we're in the right track, but please don't hesitate to tell us, no, you're missing something, or that's not what I thought it said, or whatever, because we're trying to move this quickly enough and do a lot of work.
May 18th would be 4 months from our first meeting, just to keep that in mind, because I know we've had some conversation about whether it's April or May, but based on the way the resolution reads, so.
Okay.
I mean, if we want to stay, we've been doing 3 weeks, which is, I know, aggressive, but I think this is not getting as much information back as this last one was, just trying to get the data.
But I think if we start drafting, that's the
Yes,
that's the
drafting,
work.
true, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of what we would be doing next week is starting to make that list and starting to draft. I mean, we've already sort of a little bit started with this. So if we tried to find a time, another time in March, towards the end of the month, then we might be in good standing to have something scheduled in April. As far as public meetings and having a draft. So what does the end of March look like?
So what we've done before, if this is okay with everyone, if we say we want to do, either, so the 22nd is 3 weeks, the 29th is 4 weeks. Doesn't have to be on a Wednesday, but around those 2 dates, if you leave that flexible, just so I can look at availability of room, send out an email to all of you to update schedules again, if that would be okay, because I know we've had some members not be here for the last few meetings, so I think it'd be good to try to get their updated schedules, so we can try to get a majority here. Is that an okay direction?
I can already see this planning commission on the 22nd.
Well, yes, okay. So do you want to do the last week in March then?
Late in the week would be conflict with the NCAA tournament.
I always forget to think about that.
Some turn out.
I don't even know what does that do to schedules? I have no idea.
We'll see.
Means I won't be
I
there.
have no idea.
They don't play on Monday.
We plan on playing through
Yeah.
April,
Right, so earlier in the week.
around here.
Of like the 27th, 28th.
But you couldn't do a Tuesday, right?
Can't do two.
Yeah.
Actually, we wouldn't have a meeting on the 28th, because that's the fourth Tuesday of the month.
What about
Are
the
we o-
Thursday?
I think they were that would have to be the week before, right? The 23rd, which would be 3 weeks instead of 4. I mean, Craig, how are you feeling about 3 weeks versus 4?
How are you feeling?
Yeah.
Well, I felt about it great this last time and then didn't. I mean, I think for us to get all of this ready, but I know we're on a tight timeline, it might be better that last week in March rather than the 20th. But again, I think if we can say those 2 weeks, I'm going to have Sandy email you all again with kind of a poll of what your dates are those 2 weeks, and we'll look at availability of room.
Yeah, I'm just sorry. I thought we
Is
could
that
narrow
okay?
it down a little bit.
I know,
with those in the room, so,
if those 2
yeah.
weeks are narrowed enough, I mean, I think that's pretty narrow.
Okay, that's narrow enough?
Is that
Okay.
okay?
23rd,
start-
28th, or 29th are all good for me.
Okay, 23rd, 28th, and 29th.
And then something I would just mark related to the plan and the timeline we're on roughly is that if we meet at the end of March and hopefully leave that meeting with some plan for a draft of recommendations, something along those lines, that's going to have to be sort of cleaned up internally probably. Sherry might have to do some work on it. Tony might have to do some work on it. So we'd probably be looking at a public meeting in the middle of April at the earliest. And then bear in mind, if we're doing a public meeting and asking people for their input, they will give us input and we will have to wrestle with that input and refine recommendations or not based on what we hear. So that would probably mean that I guess you'd be meeting again towards the end of April, and at the end of April, you would have held the public meeting and you'd be grappling with feedback and coming up with a plan to refine recommendations so that it could proceed on to City Commission at some point in May.
Yeah.
That's mostly just me talking out loud, but it was
My
helpful.
that is
Just gave me a small heart attack, but.
My only concern with that is on that scenario, you haven't seen sort of formal documents of this that we would
Right.
present to the public before then. It'd be based on your recommendations, but in terms of, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
unless we want to try to come back with some of that, I mean, at the next meeting.
Yeah. You could gather again in May and then
Sure. Okay.
come to consensus on the recommendations, and then they go to City Commission shortly thereafter.
Right,
and,
okay.
There's also a step in here to, when near final draft of recommendations are ready, they're shared with board members and staff, not for comment, not for revision, but just to keep them up to date on what's happening so that it doesn't take them by surprise, because obviously they're huge stakeholders in this process. So we'll just want to make sure to think about how we keep them in the loop as we move through. But that's accounted for in the plan.
And I think we can make a healthy start on that, the next meeting. I think we can do a lot of work on getting that and
We'll get it out to you a little earlier.
Yes.
than we have, so that you can adjust to
Yeah.
the draft and look at the language.
that would be great. Okay. Any other comments, business, thoughts before I ask for a motion to adjourn? All clear? Okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Gabby Smith, I'll second.
Any further discussion? Nope. Can you take the vote, please? Or just, can we say all in favor? Okay.
Acclamation.
Yes.
We're good.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Yeah.